What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto's first date with Hinata turned into a dangerous night? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto was uber tired by the time his training session with the new and improved Team 7 had ended. After the war had finally ended, everything went back to the way it was. After nearly 3 years, the village was almost as good as new. Almost being the key word here. It hasn't fully been rebuilt yet because Madara had done a shitload of damage to his beloved home. But they are slowly working on getting it back to normal, and everyone was doing their bit to help out. Finally arriving at his favorite destination, which is Ichiraku's by the way, he lifted the curtain up. It was a much bigger restaurant now. The owner had taken the opportunity to improve it a little bit. Along with the stools like the old restaurant, to the side of the restaurant there were tables and chairs as well, allowing for big groups to have a meal. But Naruto still liked to sit on the stools, which is where he found Hinata sitting, possibly, most likely, waiting for her ramen cup. "Hey Hinata," he greeted her with a big smile, sitting down on the stool beside her. She visibly flinched and Naruto guessed that was because of the volume of his voice. A lot of people said he was loud, but he disagreed. His hypothesis was that everyone else was just too quiet. "Naruto-kun, how are you?" she asked timidly as he ordered a pork ramen bowl. To his great relief, Hinata has almost completely lost her stutter now. Again, almost being the key word. His relationship with the girl has greatly improved since the war as well. If it weren't for her, he would still be wallowing in self-pity while Madara took over the world. He was very grateful for that, as should everyone be. But it had been a long time since the war. They were 16 years old then, now they were 19. They were older and wiser. When she confessed to him, she was young, and he believed both of them have put that behind them as a big mistake. And he believed she truly regretted it. He may have saved the village, but he is still the Jinchuriki. He has friends, people who loved him, but he didn't believe anyone would love him enough to want to spend their life with him. He had accepted that fact as it is. "I'm fine, you? Come back from a mission?" he asked her as their ramen arrived at the same time. Naruto's mouth instantly watered as his life source arrived. "I'm fine too. Yes, my team, just arrived," she said, blowing on her noodles to cool it just as he was. "And they sent you alone?" he asked as he stuffed his chopsticks in his mouth as the taste of his favorite food invaded his taste buds. "I was heading home, but I craved ramen for some reason," she admitted with a tint of pink on her cheeks. She looked rather cute like that too, with the blush and all. The blush was a permanent thing on her face to him as they grew up, but he rarely got to see it adorning her face now. He guessed it had something to do with her not having feelings for him anymore. But that thought always made him feel a little lonely, so he concluded it was because she has come out of her shell and isn't as shy as she used to be. "Hey, me too. I craved ramen for some reason too," he said as he turned his stuffed mouth towards her. She smiled at him warmly, probably because he always craved ramen and she knew it. "I mean, who didn't? I had a feeling you would," she said, laughing softly as she reached for a napkin to her right. To his utter surprise, she reached her hand with the napkin towards his face and wiped the corner of his mouth with it. He stopped all movements, his chewing, blinking, breathing, everything, and stared at her, surprised. She must have noticed the sudden tense atmosphere because she pulled her hand away quickly and her smile faded before the red returned to her face in a higher shade. I'm sorry, she stuttered, making him smile for reasons he didn't even know. She immediately went back to eating afterwards with her head down, avoiding his eyes at all costs, but her ears still remained red. To someone else, that would have been something gross. Something disgusting and very Naruto-like, as people often referred. Yet she hadn't found it gross at all. In fact, she had just smiled. It was things like this that made him wish he had fallen in love with her when they were younger. But he cannot change the past, and his future is set out for him. This continued for over a month. They always had ramen together before going home for the day. If one of them had a mission, neither ever forgot to leave a note with Ichiraku owner or Ayame to let the other know that they will not be coming. Until the other got back, they will have ramen alone. But they both soon noticed that ramen did not taste the same in those days as they sat alone on their usual stools, wishing the other was here with them. So when they saw the other the next time, neither could help the automatic smiles that appeared on their faces. It was not, however, on one of those days that Naruto waited on his favorite stool for his lunch partner without ordering even one bowl of ramen because she had not left a note for him, so he knew she would show up. But she was exceptionally late today. Naruto knew Hinata to be a punctual girl because before, she had been waiting for him at the ramen bar almost every time. So he waited as he tapped his fingers on the table in a rhythmic manner. He was surprised, however, to find himself thinking about not ramen but his midnight-haired companion and why she is late. Had she been called to an emergency mission? That would explain why she hadn't left a note. If so, then was it dangerous? Will she be all right? Will she return soon? Such thoughts plagued his mind as he continued to wonder if he should demand answers from Tsunade Ba-chan. That's when his two teammates interrupted his disturbing train of thought. Wow, not even one bowl. Something must really be wrong. Naruto heard Sakura's soft voice from behind him. He turned in his seat to face one Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchiha. Her gentle smile and the dastardly smirk of the Uchiha behind her made him register what she had said. Hey, I eat a perfectly healthy amount of bowls. Don't make it sound like I'm carelessly eating away, he said, closing his cerulean eyes and nodding his head with his hands crossed in front of his chest. That'll tell her. She's always saying I eat too much ramen. How can one even eat too much ramen? It's unheard of. And how many bowl is a healthy amount? Oh, the great ramen king? Sakura asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. 10, he said without a moment's beat. That's not a healthy amount, Dobi. Came the bored voice of his so-called best friend. Really, why was he friends with this asshole again? Hey, you got something to say? Say it to my face, bastard. Without hiding behind your girlfriend. Naruto shouted, standing up from his chair and pointing an accusing finger at the Uchiha. I did say it to you, face moron. Sasuke muttered with a bored sigh. Settle down, boys, or I swear to God you will regret ever having met me. Sakura growled, halting Naruto in his steps towards the Uchiha. I already regret it. Sasuke muttered under his breath, but Naruto heard it and that meant Sakura sure as hell did too. Sounds like the bastard's going to be in the doghouse today. That punishment is oddly satisfying to Naruto's ears. You. Sakura began pointing a finger at Sasuke as her face became pink with anger, are going to regret that later. She finished, then turned around to point a finger at Naruto. You. Why the long face? She asked, much to Naruto's relief because, boy, can Sakura-chan punch. Looks like his girlfriend stood him up. Sasuke said with a smirk, and if Sakura wasn't here Naruto would teach a good lesson to him. But lucky for the bastard she was. He better be grateful and pray to Kami Naruto doesn't find him alone. She didn't stand me up. Naruto protested loudly at Sasuke but then immediately realized what he had said as one of Sasuke's dark eyebrows rose up in amusement. And Hinata's not my girlfriend. He shouted again in an attempt to correct his mistake. Come on Naruto, you can tell us. The whole village already knows anyway. Sakura said with a knowing smile. Naruto's attention turned from Sasuke's smug face to Sakura's smiling one. What are you talking about, Sakura-chan? He asked, his voice finally reaching normal human levels. Don't play dumb with me, Naruto Uzumaki. Everyone knows you've been on dates with Hinata-chan. I thought at least you'd tell me about it, Naruto, if not Sasuke. Sakura said with a sly smile that Naruto could not understand. Sakura-chan, I'm not dating Hinata, he said, trying to figure out from what means she came to that absurd conclusion. Haven't you been having lunch with her for like a month now, Dobi? Sasuke finally decided to raise his voice in the matter because it wasn't going anywhere in the hands of his best friends and girlfriend. Yeah, but that doesn't mean we are dating. Naruto replied as if it was the most obvious thing, which it was to him. I thought you liked Hinata, Naruto. Sakura said, her voice going from excitement to confusion in a matter of milliseconds. Yeah, but, he trailed off. Then it looks like you've been dating her without even knowing, you idiot. Was Sakura's response to his unfinished sentence. Tip from Dating 101 Sakura-chan. A date requires two people who like each other. Just me liking Hinata doesn't make us a couple. He finished as reality hit him hard and cold with the truth. It had taken Naruto quite a while to figure out he had romantic feelings for Hinata. He had finally concluded it on one sleepless night as he lay awake because every time he closed his cerulean eyes, all he saw was her cream-colored eyes and shy smile. So he lay awake that night, only closing his eyes to blink because fate was cruel and it wasn't meant to be, and he knew better than to dream of things that could not be reached. It had been a couple of days since that night, but his desire to see her and be with her had not stopped because he barely slept at night. If anything, it had grown more intense, more painful. Naruto. He was brought out of his thoughts by Sakura's tired-sounding voice. Please tell me. But she was cut off by Sasuke of all people as he held up a hand to stop her. No, let me do this, came Sasuke's voice. Naruto was surprised because Sasuke Uchiha just offered to do something. And if Naruto knew one thing about Sasuke, it was that he never offered to do something. Ever. Never. Unless it had something to do with inflicting pain on Naruto. And the next thing he knew was the blinding pain at the top of his head. Naruto's hands went up to cover the already bumpy area with a scowl on his whiskered face. Ow, what the hell, man? Naruto exclaimed, shutting his eyes to get rid of the stars behind his eyes. She likes you, you dumb moron. Although I failed to see her reasoning. Sasuke finished with exasperation. Naruto's eyes shot open sand. He stared at Sasuke through the pain and the stars that hadn't had enough time to disappear. No, she doesn't. She doesn't like me anymore. Naruto protested again in an attempt to get rid of the little ray of hope that unwillingly rose inside him. Did she tell you that? Sakura asked, bewildered because she knew for a fact how much Hinata was in love with her teammate, who was doing an amazing job in proving how much of an idiot he really is. It had been only too obvious while they defended the village from Pain and Madara. No, Naruto said, straightening up and looking dejected. Hinata's been in love with you for years. Sakura said softly with a smile on her face. That can't be true, because it's impossible, he tried to reason. Was what they are saying true? Has she truly not stopped loving him even after he had never given her an answer to her confession? Does she still love him? Those were questions that repeated over and over in Naruto's mind. Question he needed answers to and answers he was afraid of. He was so lost in thought that he had failed to notice the midnight hare that floated into the ramen shop. Sorry, Naruto-kun. My father wanted to. Hinata halted mid-sentence as she panted to see Naruto staring at her without the happy grin he always had plastered on his face. Well, see you guys later. Have fun on your date. Sakura said with a mischievous smile as she waved goodbye and left the shop with Sasuke closely behind her. Hinata's eyes widened at that and her cheeks went back to a pink hue. That's when Naruto decided it wasn't worth it. The answers to his troubling questions weren't important if it meant they couldn't have ramen together every day. If he couldn't see her every day. If they were going to feel awkward every day, if they could not even be friends afterwards. He was the host to one of the most dangerous demons. No matter how many times he saved the village or how in control he was of the demon, it is something that another could not live all of their life with. It had been nearly 20 years and he had only just begun to accept him for who he is. It is unreasonable to expect another human being to accept him for who he is. With that, Naruto came to a decision, one he thought he should be familiar with yet hurt all the more nonetheless. Naruto chuckled lightly, plastering on his grin into place. Sorry about that, Hinata. They were just teasing, he said, scratching the back of his head to take his kind off the pain he felt in every limb of his body. Naruto-kun. She began worriedly because his usually tanned face had lost all its color. It's okay, Hinata. I'm sorry the village thinks you are dating me. I'll make sure the whole village knows it's not true by the end of the day. Believe it, he said as the grin faded to be replaced by a sad smile and a completely defeated look in his cerulean eyes. Hinata was so very confused. But more than that, she couldn't stand to see the look in his face. And what he was saying made no sense. The whole village thinks we are dating? She thought as her heart skipped a beat at the implication. She hadn't thought they were dating because she knew Naruto did not like her that way. So her feelings had remained unknown to him, though they never wavered. I'll make sure every single person knows you are not my girlfriend. You don't have to feel ashamed after that. He finished quietly, and before she could even register what he had said, he was out of the restaurant and walking away from her. Why was he saying things like that? She was never ashamed to have been seen with him. Never, not for one single moment had she felt that way. Whether he knew it or not, he was hurting her with his words. And he has never hurt her before. It was a pain she could not bear. A pain greater than unrequited love. She did not think there was any pain greater than unrequited love. It took her only a moment to run out the shop and chase him because he had to know that her greatest happiness came from being with him. She had to let him know that. Naruto walked aimlessly through the streets as the pain in his chest continued to grow. He was all too familiar with the feeling. He had felt it before in his genin days. He had felt it on that day Sasuke woke up and Naruto realized the extent to which Sakura loved him. It had increased as he saw Sasuke's face and realized that he wasn't the only one who was fond of Sakura-chan. The pain was too much for a 12-year-old to handle and he had left the hospital room just like he had left Ichiraku now, leaving Hinata behind. I wonder if anyone asked her about us? I wonder what she felt. Did it hurt her this much when I didn't talk to her after she confessed to me? Did I lose my one chance for happiness back then? Will I get another chance too? He was halted from his depressing train of thoughts as he heard her voice calling out to him. At first he thought he was hearing things because the pain was too unbearable, but then he heard it again. Naruto. He turned around at the sound, to the image of her panting barely 10 feet away from him. Her cheeks were slightly pink from running, her face glistened under the sun as sweat dripped down her neck and her blue hair blew in the wind making a few strands dance in front of her porcelain face. Naruto didn't know what to say and he couldn't even imagine what she wanted to say to him. So he stared at her cream-colored eyes as she stared at him with such determination that he had never seen in her before. He continued to stare at her with confusion-filled eyes as she walked towards him to stand in front of him. He never before realized how short she was compared to him. The top of her head only reached his chin and for a brief weak moment he thought how perfectly they would fit in each other's arms. You know I never believed it when people called you an idiot. But, you truly are an idiot Naruto-kun. Her soft voice reached his ears and he blinked once, twice 3 times only to end up cocking his head to the side in confusion. Hinata had no idea where she got the courage to say something like that to Naruto. But her only goal right now was to let him know how important she was to him. She could feel embarrassed about it and hit herself over the head with a stick later. I have never been ashamed to be seen with you Naruto-kun. I want to be by your side for longer if possible. She began with certainty in her voice. Don't ever think that again. It hurts me when you think you are not worthy of love Naruto. I understand, if you don't like me that way. But you need to know that the whole village looks at you differently now. The whole village takes pride in saying Naruto Uzumaki lives here. The whole village loves you Naruto and I love you. She finished quietly. She had never spoken so many words at one time. But she pushed that thought away to focus on his beautiful eyes so he knows she meant every single word. But as time passed with him only staring wide-eyed at her, she found his gaze hard to hold on to. Everything she had just voiced quite loudly in a desperate attempt to make him understand his importance to her, repeated in her head and all she wanted to do was crawl up in a hole and die. If Kami-sama for once listened to her, she hoped that would happen. But it didn't, so she shifted her gaze down to stare at Naruto's chest as she felt her whole face heat up. Naruto hadn't said anything for a long time, so Hinata decided to make a run for it and never look back. Maybe she could move to Suna for a while. She took a step back but was surprised when she was stopped by Naruto's strong hold on her wrist. Her eyes shot up towards his as he held her wrist. His eyes held so many emotions that Hinata could not even begin to explain. All she could do was stare at him with wide-open eyes. Sorry, she heard him say as she tried to control her rapidly beating heart. But as soon as the words left his mouth, her fragile heart gave a painful squeeze that made her want to crumple to the ground. She attempted to ready herself for rejection because rejection was something she did not bother to think about as she gave her little speech. But rejection had been something she had been constantly afraid of. Before she could pull her wrist from his hold to save herself the pain, he had begun to speak again, not saying anything, after pain attacked. He finished in a small voice that it took her a moment to register what he had actually said. It was so strange for Naruto. This intense feeling he has in his chest, in his hands, fingers, skin, throat, everywhere. It felt like he wanted to say so many things, yet he could not find the voice to. It felt like his body was on fire yet he still had goosebumps forming on the back of his neck. It felt like his fingers were itching to touch her cream skin but he could not move his hand. He felt like he wanted to smile and upon testing the water, he realized that's the only thing he can do at the moment, so he did. Naruto broke into one of his less famous smiles. His grin was common, but a true smile from Naruto is something not many have seen. She thought he was even more handsome, something she did not believe was possible. So before she could even think of it, her thin lips broke into a beautiful shy smile as well. His smile, just as his happiness she found, is contagious. Looking at him you couldn't help but smile back at him. "Hinata, let's go on a date," he said as his hand moved from her wrist to intertwine his calloused fingers with her slender fingers. "And this time I promise we'll both know it's a date. And it won't be Ichiraku," he said as his smile transformed into a full grin. Yes, she agreed, but was confused and frankly surprised that he knew other places to eat existed in Konoha. Hinata suddenly remembered something and was shocked it wasn't him who remembered it first. "Since we missed our lunch today, we'll eat there now," she suggested, remembering their cancelled lunch from a while ago. "You know me so well," he said with a chuckle as he pulled her in the direction of Ichiraku's. "Then our second date will be our official first date," he said as the newly formed lovers headed towards what Naruto pretty much considered his second home and what Hinata considered the place where their relationship finally developed. Saying Naruto was excited for his date with Hinata would be an understatement. This was his first date ever, like ever. He had never ever expected that someone would ever agree to a date with him. He had asked Sakura a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 times, but it had all been a joke. He had known Sakura would say no because he had known how she felt about the bastard. But now an actual female has agreed to go on an actual date with him. Not just any female either, a super cute one. Naruto was barely able to control his excitement the past week. There isn't anyone in the village of Konoha who did not know about his and Hinata's date. Naruto hadn't even bothered to bring 1 cup of ramen today because Hinata had suggested she cook for the two. They had decided on a picnic. It had been Naruto who suggested the idea because from previous knowledge, specifically from a birthday party of one dog lover, told him that Hinata was pretty much the best cook this town had ever known. He had also suggested that he bring something as well to the table, although he has no idea other than ramen. He thought Hinata knew that too, which is why she smiled cutely and refused. The fact that he couldn't contain his excitement over his date and the fact that Hinata is an amazing cook might be the exact 2 reasons why he was in the current situation. Or it could be that his so-called friends actually did hate him and has come to ruin his life. 4 hours earlier, Naruto was practically bouncing with excitement as he waited for Hinata at the bottom of the Hokage mountain. Despite Hinata saying that all he had to do was show up, he had brought with him all kinds of drinks in a cooler. Anything from water to beer was in his newly bought blue cooler. He had actually done it because he had thought the grocery store to be a place with lots of people, therefore if he announced his date there, everybody would know. But he needed a reason to go there and a reason to hang around for longer, thus ending up with an unnecessary amount of liquids. Upon seeing Hinata's midnight hair farther down the street, Naruto took one hand from his pockets and waved at her with a huge smile. She raised her hand midway as well to greet him. She stopped walking in front of him with a pink blush adorning her pale cheeks. "Hi Naruto-kun." Her quiet voice greeted him as she came closer to him. "You look amazing, Hinata." He couldn't help but voice his opinion rather loudly. Hinata had her long hair in a bun at the back of her head and a few short curls framed her face. She wore a white sun dress that comes up to her knees that had off-the-shoulder sleeves with delicate frills, and the skirt of the dress was a gourd-style skirt, and the whole dress accentuated her well-formed figure beautifully. Hinata had thought the dress was a bit too much. She had planned on wearing her normal clothes, but Ino, Sakura and Tenten had infiltrated her home, and having found nothing worthy in her closet, they had taken her shopping. Although she had been reluctant to go shopping, she rather liked the dress and had fun hanging out with other girls, something she rarely did. As she walked closer to Naruto, she grew anxious as to what he would say. So she held her brown picnic basket in front of her as she avoided his eyes. Naruto has always seen Hinata in her ninja clothes. Not that those looked bad on her, but as it seems they have not been doing her justice. Naruto thought she looks absolutely stunning. "Thank you Naruto-kun. I think we should get going." Hinata stuttered as Naruto only continued to stare at her with wide eyes. "Oh, yes." He finally snapped out of his trance with a nervous laugh. They walked up to the Hokage mountain in silence, because Hinata was still trying to get over Naruto's comment about her looking amazing, and Naruto was trying to regain his pride after gawking at her. They laid the blue and white picnic cloth she had brought with her and she sat down with her legs tucked beneath her. Naruto too sat down opposite her with his legs crossed in Indian style. Hinata put down all the food down on the cloth one by one as Naruto watched her fluid movements. "That's a lot of food." Naruto finally spoke up as Hinata endlessly brought out containers from the basket. "I got a little carried away," Hinata said as she pulled out the last item, which happened to be ramen, and put the basket away behind her. Naruto chuckled before opening the lid of the cooler for her to peek inside. There were so many bottles and cans stuffed in there through the ice. Hinata's eyes widened slightly before she broke into a soft laugh as she put her hand over her mouth. Naruto also joined in, laughing at their current situation. 15 minutes into their date and the two remained sipping orange juice from their cans as the sun shone down on them. At 1:15 in the afternoon, the sun was brutally descending upon the couple. But the big sakura tree that they had sat under gave them all the shade they needed. Just as soon as Naruto reached for an egg roll is when he heard the very familiar barking of a very familiar dog. But before Naruto could turn to look at the owner of the dog, it had pounced on Hinata's lap with its head resting on it as Akamaru panted with his tongue out. Hinata giggled slightly as she patted his white head. "Naruto, Hinata-chan, what's up?" Naruto heard the annoying voice of the owner of the dog from behind him. "This idiot better leave soon," Naruto thought in annoyance. "You know what's up," Naruto retorted. Of course Kiba knew they were on a date. Everyone knew. Naruto had made sure of it. "Oh right. The date or whatever," Kiba said casually, coming to sit beside Hinata. Naruto frowned, getting the feeling he's not going to leave soon. "Hello Naruto." Naruto jumped at the voice coming from right behind him. "What the hell Shino?" he exclaimed with a hand over his rapidly beating heart. "As per usual, you have completely disregarded my existence," Shino replied, sitting in the other side of Hinata. "Man, why were they here?" Naruto wondered in irritation. "We came to make sure you don't try any funny business." Kiba carelessly stuffed 2 egg rolls in his mouth while feeding one to Akamaru. "Funny business?" Naruto repeated confusedly. "As my sister always says, men are all dogs. Although I highly disagree with the statement, I'd rather not take any chances," Shino said monotonously, reaching for a fried shrimp. "Shino-kun," Hinata said, bewildered that he would even suggest something like that, about Naruto of all people. Did these two actually think I would be so low? Naruto thought, staring at the two as they stuffed their faces. Naruto concluded, no, he was certain the three had come in order to eat all of their food. Naruto wanted to demand that they leave because he wanted to be alone with Hinata. But one look at her smiling face as she fed more egg rolls to Akamaru stopped him. She seemed to be enjoying their company. All Naruto could do was hope they leave soon on their own. He sighed and reached his for an egg roll, but was surprised when he didn't come in contact with any. He turned his eyes towards the container only to find it empty. He threw a glare in Kiba's direction, ready to kill him, but was stopped, thank goodness. I made some teriyaki, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, holding up a container. She felt Naruto's murderous aura. It was easy to recognize since he almost always had a happy aura surrounding him unless he was in a serious battle. Naruto let out another sigh, taking the whole container in his hand before Kiba or Akamaru could make a jump at it. He popped a piece of chicken in his mouth and bit into it angrily, but his anger soon dissipated as Hinata's cooking did wonders in his mouth. It tasted so good he was tempted to close his eyes and let out a low moan, but held it in as he remembered Kiba would never let him live it down. This tastes so good, Hinata, Naruto said as he popped more in his mouth. Of course it does, it was made by Hinata after all. Kiba decided to answer for her with his already full mouth, but Naruto was too consumed in his meat to say anything more. 30 more minutes passed with no sign of leaving from none of the three that interrupted their date, so Naruto decided that was okay. They could still have a good time. The teriyaki has really made him see things clearly. Don't you have a sister, Hinata? Naruto began conversationally, trying to get to know her better. Yes, she does. What's it to ya? Kiba said with narrowed eyes. Naruto wanted to Rasengan the guy to oblivion. But Hinata looked at him with apologetic eyes, silently begging for forgiveness for her teammate's behavior. But before Naruto could grin at her to assure her it was okay, he was interrupted by a screech coming from behind him. Naruto closed his cerulean eyes, hoping to Kami it wasn't who he thought it was. After his prayer he turned around, slowly, as if delaying it would change the outcome he already knew was coming, opening his eyes to face what or whom he did not want to face. "You guys are having picnic?" Ino's high-pitched voice asked with clear excitement. "Picnic?" Naruto heard Choji say as his eyes sparkled, and the next thing Naruto knew, Choji was sitting beside Kiba munching down anything within reach. "What a drag," he heard Shikamaru's voice from right beside him. "Man, these people are fast when food is in question," Naruto thought in amazement. He just didn't realize he would be the same if the situation has been different. Why are all these people acting like they had no idea about this when he had told them himself what it was? "Oh my god, Hinata, these rice balls are the best. What the filling?" Ino exclaimed loudly, even for Naruto. "It's okaka," Hinata replied with a smile at Ino. "You had to give me the recipe," Ino said, looking at Hinata with her blue eyes in pure admiration. Hinata nodded in agreement, glad she would be able to help in any way. Why was she smiling so much at everyone when their date is being interrupted? Maybe she was bored in the first 15 minutes of the date and is glad there's more people now. "Am I boring?" Naruto thought in shock as he continued to stare at Hinata's smile. He had never thought he was boring, nor has anyone ever told him so. So he had never put much thought into it. Before he could venture further into the subject of whether Hinata was already bored of him even before their first date ended, he saw Ino wave her hand over her head with a huge smile. "Tenten, Lee, come on over," Ino yelled as if this whole date was her plan. "Wow, there's so much food and drinks here," Tenten said as she reached their picnic spot and sat down beside Shino with her legs crossed and leaned in to look at the spread. "I know. Dig in," Ino said as she took a sip of her grape juice. Even with all these people eating, there was still lots of food left. And Naruto has yet to eat something other than his teriyaki, which seems to have disappeared from his hands and appeared in Shino's hands somehow. She should eat something. His guess was that she has been cooking all morning, meaning she probably didn't even have breakfast. Naruto reached for the ebi mayo container which was closest to him and leaned forward to give it to Hinata. "You should probably eat something, Hina." But his attempt to feed some food to the actual cook was interrupted by a very enthusiastic Lee. "I am truly grateful, Naruto-kun, my youthful friend. I do not know how you knew ebi mayo is my favorite dish. I am ever so glad to have met you," Lee exclaimed as he took the dish from Naruto's hand and ate it with tears at the rim of his large eyes. "I can't believe you agreed to go on a date with this guy, Hinata," Tenten said, pointing her thumb at him while looking at Hinata. What was so wrong with going on a date with him? He could not figure out for the life on him. "Yeah, if Neji were here he'd want to fight to the death with you," Ino said, enjoying more of the ebi mayo she bullied Lee into giving her. The whole group became silent at the comment and Ino became immobile as she realized what she had just said. Nobody has truly moved on from the death of their comrade, and Naruto believed they never would. Which is probably why they all found it hard not to include him in their everyday conversations, though they tried their best to avoid it. Naruto's concerned blue eyes immediately went to Hinata. Neji had died in front of them. That image was something neither would ever forget. Hinata was slowly stroking Akamaru's head, her head bent down, making it impossible for him to see her eyes. But Naruto knew what she must be feeling, because he felt it too. Neji had given up his life to protect the two of them. It was a sadness that Naruto could only bear because time had allowed him to. But time had not been so kind to Hinata, he thought as he saw a single tear roll down her pale cheeks. "Hey Ba-chan, come on over," Naruto yelled, grinning as he saw Tsunade walking on the other side of the mountain. He had wanted to take everyone's mind off of the sad turn of their subject, and as more people joined, the wider her smile seems to be. So he was delighted to have seen Tsunade. "What do you all doing here? This isn't a park. This is a respectable PLA," Tsunade began as she stomped her way towards them. But stopped mid-sentence. "Is that beer?" she asked, pointing at the bottle in Shikamaru's hand and plopping down beside the cooler as she took out a bottle for herself. "My, yes it is," she said happily as she chugged the bottle down. "Have some tempura, Hokage-sama." Naruto heard Hinata's soft voice as she reached the box of tempura towards Tsunade. "Don't mind if I do," Tsunade said as she took the box from her hands. Hinata's awaited smile returned to her lips as Tsunade enjoyed the tempura. Without even being consciously aware of it, Naruto's own lips broke into a smile. Naruto immediately stiffened, recognizing the voice. "How dare you not invite Team 7 to your picnic?" Sakura's voice rang and Naruto swore he could feel the mountain moving beneath him as Sakura stomped her way to them most likely to kill him. Sakura-chan, it's not like that. He attempted to explain frantically as she stood before him with her hands on her hips with a very bored-looking Uchiha beside her. I would expect this from Sasuke, but you, I never imagined would do this. Sakura said, sounding disappointed as she sat down beside him and pushed Naruto to make room for Sasuke as well. Sasuke didn't even seem fazed by the insult but instead sat down in the little space, pushing Naruto farther into Tenten. But Sakura-chan knew I had a date today. Naruto thought, rubbing his arm because he knew it was going to bruise. Naruto let out yet another sigh. He has been doing that a lot today. There is no point in arguing with Sakura. She'd probably hit him until he was unconscious and that would be the end. This is the worst date ever. Hinata would never agree to go on another date with him. He barely got to talk to Hinata because everyone else was shouting and everyone else had decided to sit between them, so they were as far from each other as they could possibly be. He could shout but Hinata wouldn't, he knew that about her. He let out a final defeated sigh with his eyes closed and opened them and looked around him. All his friends were gathered around him and smiling and laughing and sharing stories. Other than a few important missing people such as Iruka-sensei, Kakashi-sensei, Sai, Yamada, Shizune and Neji and Pervy Sage, pretty much everyone was here. 7 years ago, he had nobody. No one looked at him, they talked behind his back and avoided him at all costs. He was always alone while everyone else grouped together. But now, he was surrounded by people who loved him and cared for him and even give up their lives for him. All his life he had thought he was unlucky, that he would never have a family. But, this was his family. Naruto Uzumaki is worth something to these people, and for some reason he had not thought about it that way before. His cerulean eyes scanned everyone's smiling faces and landed on Hinata's. She too was smiling as brightly as the sun, looking at him with awe in her face. Her soft smile and gentle eyes told him things. Things he wanted to hear, things he never thought anyone would say to him. He couldn't take his eyes off her because her message was as clear as day to him and he wanted to keep hearing it. Hinata was so happy. There were no words to describe how much exactly. She had not accidentally made too much food. She had known how much she was making, but Naruto bringing all these drinks was purely coincidental. From his words the other day, the day he asked her out, it was clear that Naruto finds himself unworthy of affection. He thought people were ashamed of him, to be seen with him. She wanted him to know how wrong he was. So she had secretly arranged so that everyone would meet them up here and enjoy lunch with them because he mattered and people loved him and he had to know that. Other than a few who were on missions, everyone had showed up and she was delighted because it looks like he finally understands what he means to everyone. See, Naruto-kun? Everyone loves you. You are important to all of us. You are worth it to all of us. Just as we have all affected your life, in one way or another, you also have touched our lives. And we are grateful for it. She thought as she smiled at him. The look of pure happiness that settled into his whiskered face as he understood made her heart flutter because it looked so innocent and pure and so vulnerable. If she could forever keep that happiness on his beautiful face, she would want nothing more. Naruto's heart felt so heavy with so many emotions. She was so amazing. While he was moping around and sulking that he did not get to spend time alone with her and wondering whether her smiles were because she was already bored of him, she had been spending it trying to make it the best day of his life. At that moment, Naruto realized that it was highly possible that he may have fallen in love with her to an extent that he did not know was possible. And he couldn't be more happier at the thought. Everyone had pretty much evacuated the picnic area as if wild boars were chasing them when all the food had disappeared, leaving Naruto and Hinata to clean the place up. Even though it was already 5:30 in the evening, the sun still shone down on them brightly, though there was a slight breeze that was greatly appreciated after the heat of the noon. The couple walked down the streets of Konoha as people cleared their shops to go home to their families. They had stopped by Naruto's place to drop off the coolers since he lived closer to the Hokage mountain. Hinata had insisted that she walk home alone since it was farther, though he had protested. So they found themselves in the clearing streets as they headed towards the Hyuga estate. To Naruto's complete and utter embarrassment, his stomach gave a loud growl that could be clearly heard in the almost quiet streets. They both stopped walking and his cheeks colored red when Hinata burst into a soft laugh but was stopped by her own stomach growling. He had only had the teriyaki with a can of orange juice while he was sure she had had nothing. Hinata's whole face turned beet red in response and she bit her bottom lip. The sight was so overwhelmingly seducing that he found his whole mouth to be completely dry in only a matter of seconds. He swallowed hard before licking his lips to get rid of the dryness. Hinata continued to stare at her feet under his scrutiny. "Hinata," he finally managed to choke out quietly and nervously in an attempt to get her to look at him. Her cream eyes lifted up to his cerulean ones from under her long eyelashes. Without taking his eyes off of her, he reached for the picnic basket in her hands and took it from her, making him successfully get closer to her. He put it down on the ground, never losing contact with her eyes. She looked nervous, he didn't blame her, he was too. His heart hammered in his chest as she blinked in surprise. He took another step closer to her. He lifted his right hand to her left cheek. It almost felt like a sin to lay his calloused and tan hand on her flawless and pale skin. As soon as he made contact with her face, she slowly closed her eyes to revel in the feeling of his hand on her face. It was so warm and big and so very wonderful. She immediately remembered the time during the war when he had taken her hand and how safe she felt in his hands. She looked so at peace at the moment, and the pink hue of the evening sky and the setting sun behind him made her skin glow, and he had never seen anything so peaceful in his life. He leaned his head forward because her thin lips seemed so inviting. His eyes dropped closed as he neared her, and he could feel her hot breath hitting his own lips, and he knew he was close now. He leaned in more and grr. Both their eyes flew open at the sound, and she nearly lost balance when she realized how close he really was to her. He put an arm around her waist and held her still, and she blushed even more as their proximity grew. Naruto secretly cursed his stomach and promised it no ramen for a week as punishment for ruining most likely the best chance he would ever get to kiss her. I have more food at home, Naruto-kun. I can heat it up. Hinata suggested, moving away from Naruto's arms in case she did something truly embarrassing, like fainting. That'd be great, Hinata. I don't think my stomach can hold on any longer. He replied with his signature grin, trying to change the awkward atmosphere and forget his failed attempt to kiss her. Why, Kami? Why won't you give me a break? He silently prayed. Naruto took the picnic basket from where he had left it, and together the two headed for the Hyuga compound. Naruto was surprised as he felt her fingers slowly interline with his and his head snapped in her direction, but she wasn't looking at him. She seems to find the dirt road much more interesting. But he could see the pink blush on her face and couldn't help but smile. He squeezed her hand in his before bringing it up to his lips to land a soft kiss on the back of her hand. Naruto felt her stiffen in response and chuckled because he had the power to make her feel so giddy, and he enjoyed it very much, and he knew he would continue to enjoy it in the future as well. Naruto was sitting in his small apartment playing Go Fish with 3 of his clones when he heard the knock on his front door. First he thought it was Sasuke coming to demand a spar. I swear it's like the bastard doesn't even know how to ask for favors, but upon opening the door he found out that it was his beloved girlfriend. The first thing he did at the sight of her is grin at her because she had been on a mission for over a week and they haven't seen each other in a while. The second thing he did is she smiled back as shut the door on her face with a horrified expression. Hold on a second, Hinata. He yelled through the door at her so that she won't get the wrong idea and leave. Oh, okay, he heard her soft voice say hesitantly. Naruto looked around his apartment in horror. It looked like a mess. She had never before been to his house, and the first time she decides to come there it looks like a tornado hit the place. His eyes moved to the kotatsu table in the middle of his apartment and landed on the 3 of his clones looking at him expectantly. A light bulb went on in his head and he ordered them to get the place presentable. The 4 Narutos got to work immediately and started stuffing things in his closet. In only 2 minutes his apartment was void of the million cups of ramen and the clothes he hadn't washed in 2 weeks. He let out a sigh when he looked back at the apartment from where he stood at the door. He ran his blue eyes over the apartment one last time, and again his eyes landed on the 3 look-alikes standing in front of him with huge grins on their faces waiting for him to open the door. He made his hand signs to get rid of them before opening the door. Like he's going to let Hinata know he hung out with himself when he's bored. He turned to the door when he was satisfied with how his apartment looked and opened it. Sorry about that, Hinata, he said with a grin without offering any explanation as to why he closed the door in her face. He had no idea what kind of lie he could say to make himself look cool in her eyes. That's all right. Are you alright though? She asked, looking at him with concerned eyes. Yeah, why? He asked, opening the door a little wider to let her into his humble home. It's just, I heard a lot of noise, she said, walking into the room and looking around. She had never been to his house before. She dreamed of coming here all the time. She dreamt that she would come into his house and cook him dinner, and then they would eat together and sit at the table and talk about this and that and laugh and smile. Now that she was here standing in his apartment, that's exactly what Hinata wanted to do. But she had to compose herself. There were more pressing matters that needed attending. She took off her shoes and neatly set them down near the door and waited for him to walk to the middle of the room. She looked at him and smiled. For the first time since she arrived at his house, she noticed something. And that something was that Naruto did not have a shirt on. He was only in his mesh shirt that he usually wore under his clothes. His well-developed muscles were totally visible to her now, and she blushed immediately but dared herself to not look away. How often does she get to see him like this? Usually he wears a jacket that covers his body completely, and it did not allow anyone to witness the muscles that flexed when he raised his arms to scratch the back of his head or the six-pack that was now right in front of her. She was glad no one saw it really, because if they did she was afraid the female population of Konoha would not leave him just for her. But she did look away when her eyes landed on his handsome whiskered face and saw the unfamiliar smirk on his face. She immediately knew that he saw her checking him out, and she felt her face heat up and she wanted to run away and hide in a place he wouldn't be able to find her. She took a few deep breaths before looking back at him, but he was still smirking and it was making him look even more handsome. The expression made him look older, it took away all his boyish features and made him look like a man and made her feel like a woman. Stop smirking, I have something important to say and you're making it hard to think straight, she told him as she walked to one side of his kotatsu table and sat down with her legs tucked under her. Hey, it's not my fault you decided to so openly admire my looks, he said as he also sat down opposite her with his legs crossed with a huge grin on his face. Hinata was doing an amazing job boosting his self-esteem about his looks. He hadn't known that he looked all that good. He still didn't think he looked as amazing as Hinata seems to think, but he liked teasing her about it because she turns even more beautiful when she's shy and embarrassed. So, to what do I owe the pleasure? He asked. Do you want some tea or something before that? He added, getting up from his place at the table. He doesn't get many visitors, but Sasuke and Sakura came here quite often and manners was something that Sakura had punched him into learning. So he knew common courtesy. She nodded her answer and watched his back as he stood at the counter and put the kettle on the stove top. He turned around after, leaning his back on the counter and crossed his arms in front of his chest. She didn't know whether he was doing things that made him look so gorgeous on purpose to make her feel uncomfortable or not. But somehow she couldn't make herself care. After looking at him for a little too long, she realized he's waiting for her to tell him why she was here so suddenly. My father found out about our date and he wants to meet you, she said hesitantly, not knowing what kind of reaction she should expect from him. He didn't seem to move at all as she stared at him. He only looked at her with the same expression as before. Naruto-kun, she said when he remained still for over a minute. Huh? Oh yeah, absolutely, he said as his grin came back to his face and gave her a thumbs up. But Hinata could see that it was strained. Naruto-kun, my father isn't all that scary, I promise, Hinata said with a reassuring smile. I'm not scared of him, Naruto said with confidence, but really he kind of was. He had known he would have to talk to Hinata's father sometime, and he had been fearing the encounter ever since his first date with her over 2 weeks ago. He really wanted to be with Hinata, a lot. But he doesn't have the best reputation with the older population of the village. He knew Hinata's father was strict. It was not news to anyone. So to have to meet him so that Naruto could court the man's elder daughter is definitely nerve-wracking. I'll be there with you. We will see him together, Hinata said with a soft smile as she stood up from her seat and walked to the kettle that had already boiled and gone unnoticed by Naruto. She poured the water in the mugs with the tea bags and let them steep as she stood beside him. He smiled at her then, because when she's smiling at him with such gentleness, he couldn't help but do so as well. How was the mission? He asked as he turned to face her, still leaning his hip on the counter. It was good. It wasn't difficult, she said as she looked up at him because he was so tall. He wasn't the boy she fell in love with anymore, and she was becoming more and more aware of that as they spent more time together. She found herself falling more in love with this man every day because he was so amazing. The Naruto in the battlefield and the Naruto from when she and him were alone are so different she sometimes found it hard to believe it was the same person. They haven't spent all that much time alone together. After their first date, which wasn't really a date, they haven't had more than a few minutes alone. And then she had to go on a mission that lasted a week. But as she stood in front of him in this moment, only a couple inches from him, she realized finally they were alone and won't be disturbed, hopefully. That's good, he murmured as he took a step towards her. She looked down at her feet because their proximity was making her feet feel weak. He lifted his left hand and tucked her hair behind her ear, making her look at him from under her lashes. Everything about her at that moment made him want to kiss her instantly. Her big eyes as they looked at him shyly, and her pink lips as they looked so inviting, and her cheeks as they turned pink. He lifted his right hand and put it under her chin and lifted it up ever so gently, and she complied. "Can I kiss you?" he whispered, and his hot breath hit her nose as he spoke. They haven't kissed before. Their first attempt was interrupted by their intense hunger, and any other time they had been alone it hadn't lasted very long. Not long enough for them to get in the mood. His blue eyes looked so gentle, and she could see the anticipation in them, and she could feel her own anticipation rising in her. So she nodded her head, and even though her mind was screaming for her to look away from his beautiful eyes, she dared herself not to. His face was so serious, completely different from his usual self. But what she didn't know was how terrified he felt at the moment. He had wanted to kiss her for the longest time. But he has never kissed anyone before. He didn't want to mess it up. But he wanted to kiss her badly enough to risk it in that moment. So he dipped his head lower and didn't look away from her eyes even as her eyes drooped closed. He too closed his eyes the moment his lips touched hers. There were no fireworks or anything cool and amazing as they connected. The only thing Naruto was aware of as he slanted his lips is her lips. He felt like there was nothing around them. That the two of them were in complete darkness with nothing around them, and the only thing he felt was the softness of her lips and the hand that landed on his back as he deepened the kiss. He didn't know if he was inexperienced or if she was inexperienced, but it felt too amazing to think about something as insignificant as that. He pushed his tongue inside her mouth, something he learned from pervy sages' pervy books, and immediately felt the warmth of her mouth. Their tongues met and danced around each other. Naruto couldn't believe how amazing it felt to kiss her and to have her hands wrapped around him and to have her body completely flushed against his body, making him aware of every curve of her beautiful body. His hands moved to cup her cheek as he deepened the kiss even more, and he could feel her hands as they moved from his back to the back of his head, and he had felt wonderful when her slender fingers ran through his hair and almost massaged his scalp. When he heard her soft moan muffled by his own mouth being over hers, he smirked again with pride because he had made her release such a beautiful sound. The moment ended all too soon for him when his lungs felt like they were going to explode, screaming for air. He reluctantly pulled away from her to breath. He slowly opened his eyes. She still had hers closed and she was breathless as she panted. She looked gorgeous with her eyes closed and panting, and her face beat red and her lips swollen and red from their kiss. She still had her hands tangled in his hair, and one of his hands still cupped her cheek just above her jawbone, and the other had somehow found its way to her waist. He waited for her to open her cream-colored eyes and look at him, giving her time to recover from this amazing moment they shared. When she finally opened them as her breathing evened along with his, her eyes were as clear as the blue skies when she lifted them up to meet his. His lips turned up in a soft smile when he realized how absolutely and unbearably happy he felt at the moment. His heart was pounding in his chest, hammering against his rib cage, and the fluttering feeling in his chest and stomach seems to increase tenfold as he continued to look at her. She smiled back at him in her usual gentle way, making her look all the more beautiful. If she thought he looked good, then she must not be aware of how stunning she truly is. She then leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes as she moved her hands to rest on his back again. She could feel his bare back through his mesh shirt and could even feel a couple of scars, and she loved it. The kiss they shared had been heavenly. She had never in her life experienced something so indescribable. She felt his hands as they also wrapped around her body, pulling her closer to Naruto. She had never thought she could be this close to her childhood love. She had dreamt it, but now she was experiencing it, and it was a million times better than her dreams. Hinata opened her eyes to be greeted by the 2 mugs of tea on the counter that she had left to steep. The tea, she exclaimed as she untangled herself from his embrace and quickly tried to dig out the tea bags from the mugs. Naruto was surprised when she hurriedly pushed herself from him and started digging out the tea bags. He watched as she put sugar in the tea. Then she handed him one mug with a smile and she took the other and they both sipped the tea side by side leaning on the counter. Naruto was the first to spit out the awfully tasting liquid. Hinata was much more elegant about it as she swallowed it with great difficulty. "We must have let it steep for too long," she said with a barely held in laughter at his expression. The tea tasted really bitter and his face had soured at the taste. In the heat of their kiss, they let the tea steep for too long and now it tasted bitter. He could still feel the bitterness in the back of his throat even though he hadn't even swallowed it. She laughed harder when his face soured even more. "I'll put some more sugar to sweeten it," she said through her giggles, reaching to take his mug from his hand. But she didn't get a chance to because he had taken her mug from her hand instead. "I have a better idea," he said as he laid the mugs on the counter and her laughter died down to be replaced with a confused expression. He took hold of her wrist and pulled her to him. Her eyes widened and she yelped as her body hit his. He cornered her as he pushed her to the counter and laid his hands on either side of her on the counter. He smirked at her as he lifted one corner of his mouth and raised one eyebrow at her suggestively. She smiled at him and raised one of her own eyebrows, understanding what exactly he had in mind. "I agree," she said, agreeing to his silent suggestion, and before he could react she put her hands on his cheeks and pulled his head down to hers and kissed him in a rare moment of confidence, especially around Naruto. He was surprised at her bold action at first, but he couldn't complain as he felt her push her tongue inside his mouth. Yup, this was definitely better than tea, or pretty much anything else in the world. Naruto sat at his favorite ramen shop with only one bowl of ramen in front of him and that too was only half eaten. It has already been 2 days since Hinata came to visit him and told him that her father wanted to meet him. Much to his delight, the subject that day had been changed to a much more pleasant one when they shared their blissful first kiss. After their little adventure, which ended way too fast in Naruto's opinion, they had bought ramen and gone back to his place to eat, after which they continued their escapade until she had to go home. Although Naruto, being a healthy 19-year-old male, had wanted nothing more than to slide his calloused hands under Hinata's shirt, he had held himself back in fear that Hinata would never want to see him if he were to do such a thing. Plus, they had just started dating and he felt it was too soon for such things. He would not let his hormones control him. Although he had half a mind to give in to his hormones, the other half wanted to wait until he saw her in a white wedding dress to be only his and his alone. But at this moment he sat in his favorite restaurant because along with her sweet-tasting lips, Hinata had brought with her a piece of information he would rather not have heard. And that was that he must at one point or another meet her father and officially introduce himself and ask for permission to continue dating Hinata. To be completely honest, he rather feared the meeting. First of all, he had never met a girlfriend's father before. Second of all, he had never met a clan leader before, and last but not least, he feared the outcome of the meeting. He could come out of the Hyuga mansion with overflowing happiness or unbearable sadness. He had absolutely no idea how he should talk to Hiashi Hyuga. He doubted he could talk like he would any other day. He also had no idea what he should say to Hiashi to make sure that he would know that Naruto would do everything in his power to keep Hinata safe and happy. It was during his inner battle that Sasuke decided to enter the ramen shop. Sakura had been on a mission for the last couple of days and the bastard had been so lonely that he had resorted to hanging out at the ramen shop. "Every time I pass by here, you are here. Don't you ever go home, Dobi?" Sasuke said, sitting down on the stool beside Naruto. "Do you realize how much you don't have a life without Sakura, that you have come here as many times as I have to have noticed that?" Naruto countered, without fully understanding that his own words have said that he himself does not have a life. Sasuke raised a raven brow at his words and waited until Naruto himself understood what he had said. But upon staring at Naruto for minutes, Sasuke knew that Naruto would not understand. "What's wrong with you?" Sasuke asked when he noticed that Naruto was not being his usual annoying self, and for some reason it annoyed him. "I have to meet Hinata's father," Naruto said, turning to look at Sasuke, fully wanting to take advantage of the one time his so-called best friend cared enough to ask him about how he was doing. Sasuke put down his chopsticks on the bowl to turn to look at Naruto. But for the first time in forever, Naruto saw that Sasuke was attempting very hard to hold in laughter. Maybe, he had never seen Sasuke laugh so he couldn't be sure. Naruto gave him a curious look. Sasuke finally managed to control himself and ended up giving Naruto an amused smirk instead. Just a heads up. You're going to screw this up. Sasuke said, going back to eating his ramen. Naruto stared at Sasuke. This bastard was voicing out his worst nightmare. Can you for once be a friend? Naruto asked, half in irritation at his friend's attitude. Sasuke didn't say anything, only continued to eat his ramen as if Naruto hadn't even spoken. Naruto took that as a no. He sighed, closing his eyes, knowing that trusting Sasuke to give him advice to make his life easier was probably not going to happen. Sasuke pushed his finished bowl of ramen away from him and made up his mind to leave the sulking Naruto. He was the sulker of the team, he couldn't be near someone who's going to steal his contribution to the team. But the voice he's been hearing inside his head since his return had different plans for him. He could vaguely recognize the voice as Sakura's. He could oftentimes hear her voice ordering him to do things to help others when she wasn't around. He hated it, but it wouldn't leave him alone until he listened to the voice. Sasuke let out a tired sigh. Sakura is really rubbing off on him and he disliked the warm feeling he gets after he's helped someone. But the voice demanded it and the voice got what the voice wanted. It was Sakura's voice after all. Alright, I take the challenge of teaching you manners so you can impress Hinata's father. Sasuke said in a quiet voice, reluctantly almost wanting to take them back as he said them. Naruto's head snapped at him in surprise. It was so fast Sasuke was surprised Naruto didn't snap his neck in the process. Really? Naruto sounded more surprised than he had been the time he said he wanted to be Hokage. To say Naruto was surprised to hear that Sasuke was actually going to help someone without gaining anything from it would have been the understatement of the century. Sasuke doesn't help people like that. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the Uchiha, knowing his personality full well. What's the catch? Naruto asked, because he knew there was going to be one. Sasuke stood up from his chair and stuffed his hands in his black pants. Do you want my help or not? He asked Naruto. To Naruto he sounded offended, but that couldn't be. Sasuke is never offended. He offends people but people do not offend Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto stood up from his chair as well. Whatever the catch may be, he desperately needed his help. Sasuke may be a bastard, but he's from a respectable clan. He's bound to know all the manner and politeness that comes with being in a big clan. Naruto is desperate enough to ask for help from Sasuke. Sasuke smirked, to which Naruto scowled, leaving the ramen bar and heading towards the Uchiha complex. Naruto put some money on the counter and sighed, closing his eyes telling himself to be brave because he was doing this for Hinata. He then followed Sasuke to the Uchiha complex. Every time Naruto comes here, the sheer size of the place amazes him. Sure, most of it is run down and it's like a ghost town at night, but Sasuke's house remained clean and standing out midst the wreckage that was the Uchiha compound. The two friends entered the house and stood in front of a shoji door. Sasuke hesitated for at most 2 seconds before pushing the door open and entering into it. Naruto followed behind cautiously, guessing that this room must have held some memories for the Uchiha. But both men refused to acknowledge it. Instead, Sasuke went in and sat down on a red cushion in the middle of the room after opening another shoji door that led to what Naruto assumed was the backyard. Thought it could also be another village in on itself for the size of it. Sasuke threw a cushion at Naruto as well, which he almost didn't catch because he was still staring at the never-ending backyard behind Sasuke. Naruto put the cushion down in front of him and plopped down with his legs crossed and hands resting in his knees. He looked at Sasuke then only to find him looking totally annoyed. You don't plop down on the seat, you sit like this, he said, gesturing to himself. Naruto's eyes wandered down to where Sasuke was gesturing. Sasuke sat with his legs tucked under him and his hands resting on his lap. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his friend's posture and snickered at the sight. Isn't that how girls sit, Teme? He asked the Uchiha in a mocking tone. Sasuke scowled at Naruto, knowing that this was going to take longer than he had anticipated. No, this is how respectable people sit. You will first put your knees on the cushion and slowly sit down on the back of your legs. He further explained in a way that Naruto would understand. Alright, I know how to sit, Teme. Naruto said, standing up and sitting the way that Sasuke told him to, with not so much grace but still enough to surprise Sasuke. "Good," he said as they faced each other. "Then what?" Naruto asked loudly, his voice echoing in the empty compound. "You speak like a normal person. When you speak to someone who's sitting so close, you don't need to raise your voice so much. Now say something in a quieter tone," Sasuke ordered. "You are a bastard," Naruto said in what he thought was a quiet tone. Sasuke didn't even seem to be fazed by the insult. "Quieter. You are a bastard," Naruto said, his voice going down in several decibels. "Better. You should speak like that in front of him. Make sure your voice doesn't get too loud and annoying," Sasuke said. "And don't fidget," Sasuke ordered harshly as Naruto moved around in his cushion. "My legs have fallen asleep," Naruto said, irritated that Sasuke is sitting in his seat so unmoving while his legs already feels like it's on a plate of thorns. A week later, Naruto walked up to the Hyuga gates slowly, as the black haori he borrowed from Sasuke kept on getting in between his legs as he attempted to walk. He pulled the fabric from between his legs before taking a deep breath and knocking on the door. His heart pounded in his chest as the worst-case scenarios played in his mind. No matter how many times he tired to imagine a scenario where Hiashi gave them his blessings, he could not put aside the picture of being thrown out of the mansion out of his head. After a couple of minutes of nerve-wracking waiting, the wide wooden doors opened to reveal a man with short hair and creme eyes. He stared at Naruto for a moment before opening the door fully to let him in. "Hiashi-sama is expecting you, Uzumaki-san," the man said, closing the door as Naruto entered. Naruto raised a blonde eyebrow at the man. No one's called him Uzumaki-san before. It felt weird to Naruto to have people talk to him so formally when just over 10 years ago people called him just about every bad noun they could come up with. "Follow me," the man said, walking past Naruto and motioning for him to follow him. Naruto did as he was told and quietly followed the man as he recalled the lessons he had been receiving for the past week from Sasuke. The man stopped in front of a shoji door with Naruto behind him. "Naruto Uzumaki is here to see you, Hiashi-sama," the young man said to the closed door. "Send him in," he heard the barely audible voice of the Hyuga clan leader. Naruto took a deep breath and swallowed hard to make his throat a little less dry. The man opened the shoji door to reveal a room bigger than any room Naruto had ever seen. He walked into the room and landed his eyes on the man sitting in the middle of it with all the grace that Naruto knew him to have. He looked back at the door as it closed behind him and suddenly he felt more nervous than before. The two remained still as Naruto tried to remember what Sasuke told him to do first. Naruto bowed down to the man as he bent his form a full 90 degrees with his hands stiffly on either side of him. "We should be bowing to you, Naruto-san. You are the one who saved the shinobi world after all," he heard the man in front of him say in a rather light tone. Naruto eased, hearing the lightness of his voice. Maybe this won't be as bad as he had expected. Naruto raised his head to look at the man and give him a huge grin. "Nah, I had lots of help," he said, scratching the back of his head sheepishly, only to remember a moment later that Sasuke had ordered him not to do that. He again stood still with his hands in his sides as his grin disappeared. "Have a seat, Naruto," Hiashi said, gesturing to the cushion located in front of him. Naruto did as he was told and sat down, going over in his head exactly how Sasuke had told him to do it. Naruto ran his eyes over the room looking for a certain heiress who had promised to be beside him when he faced this situation. "What can I do for you, Naruto-san?" Hiashi asked as he faced Naruto with his hands resting on his lap. Naruto's attention went from looking Hinata to the prideful man before him. He wasn't sure if Hiashi would allow his daughter, who is the next heiress of the clan, to be with the host of the demon who attempted to destroy the village. But Naruto was ready to beg if it came to it, if it meant that he could continue to be with Hinata and feel the way he feels when he's around her. Naruto knew that Hiashi knew why he was here. But he guessed Hiashi was playing it cool, trying to get Naruto to get to the subject. Naruto straightened his back and looked at the cream eyes of the father of the girl he loved more than life itself. His blue eyes dancing with determination. "Hiashi-sama, sir, I would like to ask for permission to court your eldest daughter Hinata, please," Naruto said, his voice not betraying the fear he felt at the moment. Sasuke had told him to not stutter, that to look at him when he spoke. To make sure that the man knew Naruto was the best man to take care of his daughter. Naruto's suspicions about Hiashi knowing about his reason for being here was confirmed as Hiashi remained as still as ever when Naruto spoke. His face giving out nothing of his inner thoughts. Naruto too remained still staring at the man silently telling him that he will not back down. If I am not mistaken, you have already taken her out on a date, before you asked me. Hiashi said finally, boring his eyes into Naruto's. As soon as he spoke, Naruto heard a yelp from the other side of the door but didn't turn his head towards it knowing full well that Hinata is on the other side of the door. He heard Hiashi sigh with his eyes closed. Hinata, he called and Naruto heard the door open slowly and behind it was a very red Hinata looking as sheepish as ever with her head bowed down. I thought I told you to stay in your room. Hiashi said sternly. I am sorry father. Came Hinata's quiet apology before she looked at Naruto from under her eyelashes sending him a soft smile. Naruto returned one of his own grins letting her know he will be fine. She then turned to leave but was stopped by Hiashi's voice. Sit down, now that you are already here. Naruto inwardly let out a sigh of relief as Hiashi said this. He did not want to be in a room by himself with the practically emanating pride. Hinata quickly grabbed a cushion and slowly put it down a few feet away from Naruto sitting down on it. Hiashi then turned his eyes to Naruto though Naruto didn't seem to notice as he stared at Hinata with a huge grin on his face gladly welcoming the ease that came to him as she sat down beside him. He only turned his attention to Hiashi when he cleared his throat loudly. Oh the date, Naruto blurted out loudly as his eyes looked at Hiashi. He scowled at himself before continuing, for forgetting to speak in human volumes. No sir, we did not go on a date. Naruto lied, because technically it wasn't a complete lie. You dare lie to me? Hiashi's voice became hard and stern and Naruto panicked. He seems to know about the date. Naruto wanted to hit himself over the head with something very hard. He didn't know why he didn't just say he did take her out. No, I mean, we did. But everyone was there with us, so it wasn't really a date. Naruto said flustered attempting to recover. Hiashi narrowed his eyes at Naruto. Naruto just gave him a grin hoping it will help at least a little. It didn't. Hiashi seems to only narrow his cream-colored eyes even more. Hiashi didn't say anything for a long time after that. He only stared at Naruto as Naruto stared back hoping to all the gods that he would impress him enough to let him be with Hinata. After a couple's minutes of Hiashi's scrutinizing, Naruto became restless. Old habits die hard they say. Naruto turned to Hinata and gave her a smile as she stared back at him with her beautiful eyes. Can I have a minute alone with your father Hinata? He asked her and she seems to want to protest for a moment before she stood up excusing herself and closing the door behind her. He waited for her chakra's signature to walk away from earshot before speaking. He turned to Hiashi again and looked at him. Hiashi-sama sir. Your daughter has managed to give me everything I have always wanted just by being beside me. I grew up with no one. Having Hinata with me makes me feel like I have everything. She makes me so much happier than I ever thought I could be and I would really like to get your permission to make her feel at least an ounce of that happiness. I promise you that I will do everything in my power to keep her safe, although I know that she is strong and does not need my protection, but I will protect her with my life. She is my life and my happiness and that will not change whether you give us your blessing or not. I assure you though, if you do not give us your blessing, I will not continue this relationship, only because I do not wish to put Hinata in a position where she would have to choose either me or her family. I will never rob her of her family when I know how much family mean. If you do not give me permission to court Hinata, I will walk away from here and stay away from her. But know that I will fight my best to get permission from you and if you do decide to allow us to date, I swear to you that I will spend every moment of my life to give her the happiness that she has already given me. Naruto finished swallowing hard again because his mouth is completely dry from talking for so long. He waited as Hiashi studied him for longer. Even if he felt rather uncomfortable under his gaze. Neji spoke very highly of you. Hiashi began and Naruto faltered for a second before composing himself. Naruto didn't expect him to start talking about Neji all of a sudden. He said you were an admirable person. He also mentioned about Hinata's feelings towards you. I was surprised to say the least, but he said the reason Hinata has improved so much in her ninja training is because she wants to be strong to protect you. Your words have inspired her to reach a level one did not believe she would ever reach. You obviously love her very much and she you. Hiashi said and Naruto felt the bubble of hope that welled up in him as he listened. He waited with bated breath as Hiyashi spoke in his authoritative voice. I will allow for your relationship to continue because you seem to make her very happy, for reasons that are beyond me. Hiyashi finished, though the last part was mumbled out so that Naruto would not hear. But Naruto was too busy being happy about receiving permission, he wouldn't have heard it anyway. Naruto's whole body relaxed and he wanted to run his hands over his hair and close his eyes. He was so relived that he wanted to pump his fist in the air like he usually does when he is victorious. But Sasuke had almost beat it into him to control it when whatever answer Hiyashi wanted to give was given. So he remained still, only letting out a sigh of relief at the answer he received. He sent a silent thanks to Neji as well. But Naruto fell from cloud 9 as he heard Hiyashi's voice say, "You will not get overly familiar with her," he warned, and Naruto shivered as he felt a cold rush run down his spine to the death glare he was receiving from the other occupant of the room. Absolutely not, sir," he assured Hiyashi before standing up to leave because he was starting to sweat profusely in places he did not was possible for one to sweat in. He did another 90-degree bend to the man. "Thank you, Hiyashi-sama," he said sincerely because he truly was thankful that he will not be losing the one thing he had ever wanted more than he wanted to be Hokage. He left the room, closing the behind him. Hiyashi watched as the shoji door closed, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Even before Naruto had come in to ask for permission to date his eldest daughter, Hiyashi had already given them his blessing. But it was still nice to know that the boy cared enough to ask as well. He had seen Naruto fights in the war and he has heard how the villagers praise the boy. He had also known the deep feelings his eldest daughter held for the boy thanks to Neji. Hiyashi is ashamed to admit that he was one of the many that despised the boy when he was younger. But now, Hiyashi is not ashamed to admit that Naruto Uzumaki is someone anyone would be proud to be associated with. As Naruto walked down the long hallway of the Hyuga mansion leading towards the front gates, he could not prevent the skip he had in his steps. He could now openly date Hinata, hold her hand and actually tell people without being afraid that Hinata's father would find out. He stopped walking as he saw Hinata waiting at the gates playing with her hands in front of her chest. Naruto smirked and walked towards her, carefully adjusting his facial expression to look crestfallen. Upon seeing him, Hinata dropped her hands to her sides and smiled, only for that smile to disappear at the sight of the depressed-looking Naruto. "Naruto-kun. What happened?" she asked quietly as he stopped in front of her, avoiding her eyes. "I'm sorry, Hinata, but your father didn't agree," he said with an exaggerated sigh. He raised his head to look at her and found her almost in tears as she stared at him in disbelief. Naruto-kun, I don't care. If my father doesn't see what makes me happy, then I don't care. I want to be with you," she finished, surprising Naruto with her declaration. He stared at her face with wide cerulean eyes. Hinata was ready to be with him no matter what. Because he made her happy. Just as being with her gives him happiness, being with him makes her happy. He felt awful for pulling such a terrible joke on her now. He broke into a soft smile before grinning at her as he scratched the back of his head. "I was just kidding, Hinata. Your father gave us his permission," he said sheepishly and watched as her eyes widened. She then let out a sigh, closing her eyes then opening them a moment later. "Naruto-kun, you scared me," she said as one of her hands went up to land over her heart. "Why would you do such a thing?" she asked as she frowned at him. "For fun," he said in between laughs, but then suddenly stopped looking at her. She looked startled and stared back at him. "But thank you for wanting to be with me so much even though I'm such a doofus sometimes," he said in all seriousness. Because it was truly a wonder that someone wanted to be with him knowing his personality full well. She stared at him for a moment longer before her thin lips lifted up into her beautiful smile. As gentle and soft as ever. "You are a doofus," she agreed, her smile never faltering. Then she took a step towards him, surprising him because Hinata never initiated actions that brought them too close together. She raised her hand and rested it on his whiskered cheek and he could feel her warmth seeping into him. Her hand on his cheek brought back memories from back when the war was still going on and he could feel the gentleness and the love she felt towards him just from this touch. She then leaned forward and kissed the corner of his mouth in a bold move he did not expect from her. Which is why he was frozen solid for a while, even as she backed away from him with a beautiful blush adorning her cheeks and her hands behind her back. When Naruto regained his composure again, He also has a tint of pink of his cheeks, but he gave her his signature grin nonetheless. Hinata, do you want to go visit Neji tomorrow? He asked her as he felt the need to go and thanked the man for looking after the two of them even in death. Hinata's smile faded and she looked at him with sad eyes. I think we owe him a visit since he's the one who convinced your father to give me a chance. Naruto told her because he really wanted the two of them to visit Neji. Hinata looked down at her feet but nodded her head after a few minutes. We can ask him how he's doing in heaven, she said quietly, and Naruto smiled at her, telling her that he will be there with her and that she is not alone. Yeah, he agreed sadly, and they both remained in the silence for a while, remembering the man who had saved their lives, giving out his own life. I had to go, Hinata. I'll pick you up here tomorrow at 10 then. He told her after a while, and she again nodded as her smile returned to her face. Bye Naruto-kun, and thanks for coming, she said shyly. No problem, besides now we can be a real couple, he told her with a grin, and she blushed even harder hearing him say they were a couple. He then waved to her as he exited the compound. How Hinata managed to get his heart beating so much with just one look was beyond him. But he liked the feelings, and he would have the rest of his life to figure out how and why she made him feel like he owned the world. The latest couple of Konoha sat on the head of the third Hokage as they looked out at the sunny streets of the village bustling with people. The village is lively as ever as civilians and ninja alike prepared to end another day of hard work. The sun was slowly setting in front of them just above the tree line. Naruto and Hinata sat beside each other as she rested her head on his shoulder and his hand hung from her shoulder. The view was so beautiful that Hinata did not want to take her lavender eyes away from it. What made the scene perfect for her was the man sitting beside her as his blonde hair swayed in the direction the wind swayed. She could hardly believe that they have been together for over 2 months. After years and years of loving him from a distance, she couldn't believe that she was now sitting beside him as they both enjoyed each other's company. Their relationship has been progressing so well that she sometimes feared fate will intervene and take her happiness away from her in an instant. So she enjoyed every minute she had with him to the last millisecond. When they first started dating, she was so nervous and embarrassed around him. But thinking about it now, it was rather odd how easily she got used to having Naruto around her so much. Now she felt so empty when he wasn't around her. Hinata? Hinata was awakened from her train of thoughts by Naruto's quiet voice. What made her surprised was that same fact. She knew Naruto was a loud person. So whenever he called out to her in a voice that she wasn't used to, she knew something was on his mind. She hummed without turning to him. He didn't say anything for a while, so she lifted her head up from his shoulder and looked up at him. His cerulean eyes looked at the setting sun before him, and the light from the sun reflected off his big blue eyes. When he still didn't say anything, she tilted her head to the side a little. I think that guard at the front gates of your house likes you, he said finally after hesitating for a long time. She watched as his mouth turned into a frown and his eyes narrowed ever so slightly, an expression that did not match his usually cheerful face. Of course he does, Naruto-kun. He's been with us since I was very young. He's only a couple of years older than me, so we grew up together. He's like a brother, she told him with a small smile. It was so odd that Naruto would say something like that. Katsu has been a good friend to Hinata, and he truly was like an elder brother to her. But it was so random for Naruto to start talking about him. They barely knew each other. No, I mean, never mind, he said with a sigh, and then she knew for sure he was upset about something. Naruto rarely sighs. She straightened from her position and sat down facing him. What is it, Naruto-kun? She asked gently, urging him to tell her what was bothering him. Naruto was usually a pretty open person, but there were times when even she couldn't read him. Like now. His expression was totally new to her, and the gleam in his usually smiling eyes is also something she has never before witnessed, even as a genin. He turned too, facing her as he adjusted his sitting position as well and looked straight at her. I just don't like the guy, he said as he suddenly averted his eyes away from her and looked to the other side. Something was definitely wrong with him, she just couldn't figure out what. Why wouldn't Naruto-kun not like Katsu? Naruto liked everyone. Also, Katsu was always so nice to her. She wanted to ask why not, but before she could, he stood up from his spot and reached his hand towards her. She looked at his hand, then at his face, and then again at his hand, wanting to continue the conversation. Your dad said to have you home before 6. He told her, and she sighed. If she wasn't home at the time, her father would be angry. She would have to ask him later about it. So she took his hand and he pulled her up onto her feet. The walk home was rather quiet today. Usually the two talked about everything and anything. But today they walked towards the Hyuga mansion silently. Naruto had his hands in his pockets and he walked with his head looking straight at the road ahead of them without even turning to face her once. Hinata walked with her hands behind her back, desperately holding them back from going back to her nervous habit of having them in front of her. Having Naruto be so quiet was definitely something new to her. Her heart beat so loudly inside her chest, but she could not figure out why. He hadn't been mad at her or anything, so why does she feel so nervous? She walked with her head down, finding the gravel road that led to her house much more interesting than anything she could see with her head held up. She only looked up when he stopped walking, and only then did she realize that they have arrived at her home. The sky was fully dark now, and the lights from the mansion and the streets are the only source of light. She given the greatest surprise of her life when Naruto reached behind her and grabbed her hand in his and held it between them. Her head snapped up to his, but by then he had already reached for the door and was knocking on it. They usually didn't act very intimate near her house. If they were holding hands, they would usually let go when they reached the gate. They just didn't want to be seen by her father, who would definitely be displeased if he ever catches them going something like that. She wanted to pull her hand away, but she also didn't want to, because when she held hands with him it always made her happy. It always made her feel so safe. Also because of the silent walk they had as he walked her home really upset her, and she felt better already. He was also holding her hand very tightly as if he knew she would be trying to pull away. The gates opened and for a moment she didn't know what to say or do, because she didn't take her eyes away from Naruto until a few seconds later. When she slowly turned her head to the door, Katsu was there staring at Naruto, and Hinata could feel that there was some tension around them. But for the life of her she could not figure out why. When she took a step towards the house she was pulled back suddenly because Naruto was holding her hands so tightly. She turned her head to him to find him glaring daggers at Katsu, his eyes narrowed. Naruto-kun, she called out to him, and his eyes snapped from Katsu to her, his eyes softening as he faced her. Her own eyes softened and she smiled at him when his blue eyes softened at the sound of her voice. He held her hand for a moment longer before smiling his bright smile at her, making her heart skip a beat. "See you tomorrow, Hinata. Good night," he said, grinning at her, and she smiled back with a blush. She honestly didn't think she would ever grow out of blushing around him. "Good night, Naruto-kun," she said to him and stood at the gate beside Katsu. Naruto once more narrowed his eyes at Katsu before turning and leaving. Hinata watched him leave until he turned the corner and walked in through the gates, giving Katsu a small smile as well. That night as she lay in her bed in her lavender nightgown, she wondered why Naruto looked so upset today. Going over the events of the day, she could only come up with one conclusion, and that was that Naruto was jealous Katsu. But that conclusion was quickly thrown aside as being total rubbish, wasn't it? Surely Naruto knew how pointless it would be to be jealous of another man when she loved him so much. She said it to him a couple of times over the last 2 months, so the possibility of Naruto being jealous of Katsu is impossible. Then, what had made Naruto so angry today? Suddenly it hit her like a thunderbolt. Naruto hadn't fallen in love with her like she had hoped. Her only explanation is that over the 2 months that they have been together, he thought that it wasn't working because he wasn't feeling the love she felt towards him. Naruto was possibly going to break up with her, and that's why he was in such a bad mood today. Hinata's heart almost beat out of her chest at the thought, and she curled up on the bed, her hands and knees tucked in her chest as the pain of their possible breakup tomorrow spread over her heart. She thought things had been going so well between them. She hadn't known he was unhappy with her. She had been so happy the last couple of months. How had she missed how he felt? Hinata did not want to sleep that night because it would only bring morning sooner to her. But despite her attempts to stay awake the whole night, she had fallen into a slumber and only woke up when the sun crept into her room in the morning. When Hinata woke up that morning, she remembered that she was supposed to spend the morning with Naruto because he was going on a 3-day mission with his team at noon. She knew today would be the fateful day. She just knew it. As she dressed for what is most likely the most dreadful day of her lifetime, many thoughts plagued her mind. Such and whether he picked today to break up with her so that he can stay away for a while until things cooled down, or whether he would do it at the beginning of their date, or at the end. Would he just say it or beat around the bush? And she dreaded each tick of her clock as the time he would be picking her up neared. When someone knocked on her bedroom door a couple minutes later, she knew that it was to tell her that Naruto has arrived to take her. She refused breakfast when the same maid asked her to have it because she had lost all appetite since last night. She slowly walked to the gates, walking as slowly as she possibly could, but eventually she reached the gates to find Naruto yet again glaring at Katsu. She still couldn't figure out why he hated Katsu so much, but it wouldn't matter now anyway, he was going to break up with her. When Naruto noticed that Hinata was on her way, he grinned broadly, his usual beautiful smile that she fell in love with so many years ago. It broke her heart when the thought that she would no longer be seen it came to her mind. But she quickly pushed it down and smiled back at him. If this was the last time they would be together, then she would enjoy it to the fullest. When Katsu too turned her way, she gave him a soft smile as well with a quiet, "Good morning," as she stopped walking beside him. "Let's go, Hinata," she heard Naruto say, a little impatiently, and she waved at Katsu. Then her hand was pulled yet again by Naruto as he pulled her away from her house in a hurry, and she wondered if he was in such hurry because he wanted to break up with her as soon as possible. But her concerns about their potential breakup was replaced by the confusion she felt when he took her to the ramen shop he loved so much and they had breakfast together. The atmosphere was still rather stiff as they ate their ramen. They didn't say anything for a long time even after she finished her bowl of ramen and Naruto finished his 10. Hinata stared at the countertop wondering how she could go about asking him if he's breaking up with her when he suddenly turned to her, and she jumped a little when he did. "I'm sorry I was in such a bad mood yesterday, Hinata," he said suddenly, and she shook her head at him. It's all right, Naruto-kun." She wanted to continue and ask him why he was in a bad mood, but before she could he stood up from his chair and grabbed her hand with a wide smile on his lips. "Let's go," he said, and pulled her to her feet without any explanation as to where exactly it is that they would be going. "Where are we going, Naruto-kun?" she asked him, surprised at his sudden energy as he pulled her to his side, his hand still tightly holding hers. Her fear about their breakup decreased a little when she saw his smiling face, but she still didn't let herself get her hopes up too much. Only then did she realize that the morning was a little chilly. There was a breeze that made goosebumps appear of her hands even in her purple jacket. She had been totally distracted this morning for such things, but now she regretted it. When Naruto started climbing the hill that was located to the east of the Hokage monument, the breeze was stronger. She subconsciously moved closer to Naruto, taking advantage of his body heat. She could feel the warmth of his hand seeping onto her hand through his. His hands were always so warm and nice. When Naruto stopped walking, staring down at her as she silently asked him if something was wrong, all he did was grab her shoulders and turn her to her left, and Hinata was greeted by the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. There below them was a river with crystal blue water flowing down towards the green forest surrounding Konoha. The river was surrounded by millions of trees and the morning sun was making the water shine. She had lived in Konoha all her life and had not known it existed. She stared at it with her mouth slightly agape, breathing in the beautiful sight. "It's so beautiful, Naruto-kun," she whispered as if the sound of her voice would disturb the peacefulness the two were surrounded by. "Isn't it? I spent long hours here as a child," he explained as he sat down on the ground and motioned for her to sit down as well, and she did without taking her eyes away from the breathtaking scene. "Alone?" she asked him, turning her head his way with her blue eyebrows raised. He nodded with a grin on his face, but it still made her heart ache to think he spent so much time alone as a child. "When people used to call me names and things, I would just come up here and spend hours here," he said with a nostalgic smile as he looked down at the river flowing beneath them. Her heart constricted as a picture of a young Naruto crying by himself came to her mind. He must have been so lonely, she thought. She moved closer to Naruto's side and leaned her body on his. She still stared at the scene even as his head turned her way. She felt her face heating up when he didn't look away from her, so she made sure to not turn her head to face him or she knew she would surely blush. "Hinata," he called out softly, and her whole body experienced a shiver at the way her name rolled off his tongue in almost a whisper. He must have thought it was because she was cold, because the next thing she knew his jacket was on her shoulders. The warmth from the jacket felt great on her cold body, and the smell of ramen that wafted into her nose when he laid it on her was so soothing to her because it was so Naruto. Whenever she was near him, this is always what he smelled like, and she loved it so much. She knew he would only be in his mesh shirt now that the jacket was off. No way in hell would she look at him now. She could see his bare skin from the corner of her eyes and she consciously looked away towards the scene, daring her eyes to stay there. Suddenly the scene before her wasn't the most beautiful thing she has ever seen. You'll be cold. She stuttered out, forcing herself to calm down. I'm fine. Kurama's chakra usually keeps me pretty warm, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, and from the corner of her eye saw him lift his hand, probably to scratch the back of his head like he usually did. So that's why he was so warm and comfy all the time, Hinata thought with a smile. His hand dropped to his side again and they were quiet again for a while until he called her name again, in that soft whisper that made her shiver. Hinata? She hummed in response, telling him she was listening. I love you, he said finally, and she stiffened, and for a dreadful 5 seconds she thought she heard him wrong. She waited a few seconds before turning to face him, but her wide eyes and the look of complete shock on her face was still evident as she faced him. You've never said that before, she told him as she looked at his blushing whiskered face looking as handsome as ever. Yeah, but I knew it a long time ago. I just didn't know how to say it, he said, blushing even more and looking so completely deplorable. Her heart was beating so loudly in her chest she could hear it in her ears, and she felt the heat she felt earlier on her face increase, and she knew for sure she was blushing too. Her heart felt like it was expanding in her chest, her throat felt like it was clogged, and her body felt like it was on fire. But neither of them looked away from each other's eyes. Everything around then didn't exist. All that was in the world was the two of them as they lost themselves in each other's eyes. Lost in the eyes of the one they loved. Do you love me too? He asked in a quiet voice hesitatingly as he averted his eyes away from hers. Of course I do, she told him as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. It kind of was, but to everyone else but him. How could he even ask that though? She had told him she loves him before. She had wanted to say it when he said it, but she was so surprised because it was a breakup she was expecting that she had forgotten to say it. His grin returned to his face when she said it, and he put his arms around her shoulder and pulled her even closer to him. Hinata was surprised and shocked and happy, and all the good emotions one person can feel at a time. Even as he walked her home later, she could not stop smiling. When they arrived at the gates of the compound, Katsu already had the gates opened and was waiting outside. When she stopped in front of him, he narrowed his eyes at Naruto before turning to her. Hinata-sama, your father is waiting, he told her stiffly, and that's when she remembered her meeting with her father. Her father would be furious. She was so lost in her cloud 9 with Naruto she has forgotten everything. He was supposed to drop you off 10 minutes ago, he said sternly, looking at Naruto rather angrily. She doesn't have time to deal with these two right now. She had to say goodbye to Naruto and attend the meeting, or her father would be even angrier. She pulled to leave, but her eyes widened when she was tugged back, and she saw Katsu's lavender eyes also widen slightly before her lips were covered by Naruto's warm ones. He held her tightly by the waist and his free hand was on her cheek as he pressed his lips against hers harder. She didn't know what to think for a while until she was reminded of how good of a kisser Naruto is. Her tensed shoulders relaxed and she kissed him back, forgetting entirely where she was and that someone was actually there as well. Before she really got into it though, the two lovers were interrupted by a growl coming from behind her. Uzumaki Eei. They both pulled away from each other hurriedly as her father's voice echoed. Hinata blushed to the color of a tomato and Naruto's blue eyes widened in fear. Sir, I didn't. Naruto stumbled for words, but any coherent ones did not escape his lips. Hinata feared for Naruto's life as her father's aura emanated murder. You better start running, Uzumaki. Her father gritted out, and Naruto didn't hesitate a moment before bolting away from the mansion, her father following dangerously closely behind. Father, wait, she called out, but the two had already disappeared out of her sight. Extra scene. 2 hours later, when Kiba suddenly arrived at her house, Hinata was surprised because their monthly team dinner wasn't until later on the day. Hinata-chan, I can't make it to the dinner today, Kiba told her, and Akamaru barked. She patted Akamaru's soft fur. She looked at Kiba as he panted slightly as if he had been running. Is something wrong, Kiba-kun? She asked him worriedly. No, everything's fine. I had to go on a mission with Team 7. Naruto can't go because he's in the hospital for some reason, Kiba said. He usually recover pretty fast. It's taking a while this time. Kiba said in curiosity, and Hinata smiled a little at him. Wonder what happened? He mused quietly, and she looked away from him. Anyway, I have to go. Hinata, Sakura, Sasuke and Sai are waiting at the gate. See ya. He waved her goodbye and ran off with Akamaru. Her father had caught up to Naruto and ended up putting him in the hospital for longer than he had ever been in there before. But he had apologized to her father numerous times for defiling her. He was forgiven after many apologies, but he was still in the hospital. She will go visit Naruto later with a few bowls of ramen as an apology. That will bring him to good health in no time. Ramen Ale cheers Naruto up, Hinata thought with a smile as she walked into her kitchen to make it for him on her own. She knew he would love it. Naruto felt like such an idiot for being so possessive over Hinata. His walk home after dropping off Hinata at the Hyuga compound had made him feel like crap. Even he couldn't figure out why he felt so jealous at the thought of that guy always hanging around Hinata. He knew very well that Hinata loved him, a lot too. So why was he so possessive this night? He wasn't stupid. He knew that men look at her, even when he was standing right there beside her. But he didn't mind that because he knew Hinata loved him. Whenever men leered at her when he was with her, he would quickly grab her hand and pull her to him and make sure that all those men knew that she was his and he will never let go. Sure, he got mad sometimes when they wouldn't look away, but that was easily fixed when he narrowed his eyes at them and his blue eyes would turn red and those men would turn around quickly. But whenever he went to drop off Hinata at her place, that guard would piss him off. Maybe it was the fact that that Katsu guy kept on narrowing his eyes at him, or the fact that his eyes would so obviously twinkle whenever he looked at her, or even the fact that he got to be so closer to Hinata even at night than Naruto was to her. It's not like he thought Hinata would be unfaithful to him, heck no, he will be able to see pigs fly before that ever happened. But, he can't really explain it. It just frustrated him. That night he lay awake on his small bed for hours, contemplating what he should do. Suddenly, he felt like he needed to tell her how he felt about her. He has been with her for 2 months now and he had known for most of it that he loved her. Yet he had not told her so as of yet. He just didn't know how to say something like that to someone. He had seen in many movies how to do it. But he seriously doubted, knowing him, that he would ever make it as romantic and perfect. But she needed to know and he desperately wanted her to know it as well. But he was sure to get restless and nervous before he even said it to her. So his best guess was to do it at a place where he felt peace. A place that calmed him, and he knew just the place. That night Naruto had a few hours of peaceful sleep and was more than ready to do what he had wanted for a while now when he woke up the next morning. The next morning when he made his way to the Hyuga compound, he felt good. He felt great really, and when he saw Hinata walk out the door as she made her way towards her, he felt even better. Seeing Hinata first thing in the morning was his favorite part of the day, right after spending the day with her. But it soon vanished when Katsu too turned his head to her and that stupid twinkle returned to his eyes and his glaring face turned to a soft smiling one. Naruto felt the odd feeling of possessiveness from yesterday build up inside him and he wanted to control it because they were still at her house and he did not want to do anything that would embarrass her no matter how cute she looked when she was all red-faced and fumbling around. So instead he glared at Katsu and reached his hand to pull her away from him. "Let's go, Hinata," he said, and he pulled her towards him and hurriedly made his way to his destination. He didn't, however, fail to notice Hinata's unusual quietness or the way she seems to avoid eye contact with him. But that wasn't too uncharacteristic for her to be like that, so he disregarded it. But he soon found himself needing a little fueling, so he made his way to Ichiraku's with a quiet Hinata beside him. Their breakfast was more than awkward today. Yes, Hinata was a quiet person, but over the last 2 months she has really come out of her shell and he couldn't be happier about it. He loved getting to know a side of Hinata that nobody had the privilege to know. Not to mention he felt a little smug about knowing that part too when no one else did. Like that part of her that would laugh really loudly whenever he tickled her because, get this, she was ticklish everywhere. Or the part of her that would very rarely initiate physical contact from him, such as reaching for his hand. He definitely loved the part of her that moaned his name when he deepened their kiss or the way she would angle her head when he pushed his tongue inside her mouth. But right now, she was being rather quiet and he himself felt like he wanted to be quiet right now to gather his thoughts. He's never told a girl he loved her knowing that the relationship has a future. Sure, he had said it to Sakura 100 times, but with her it had always been the same thing. He always knew she loved Sasuke, so he had known that even if he said it to her, she would never say it back. But now he's not the first one to say it, and he knows that this relationship he had with Hinata will last, he just knows it. So the two remained in silence as they had their breakfast. When Naruto finally felt like his eternal hunger had somewhat subsided, he turned to Hinata to find her staring at the countertop, though it was clear that something was definitely bothering her. That's when he remembered his less than subtle attempt to let Katsu know that she was his. He turned to her abruptly, startling her in the process. "I'm sorry I was in such a bad mood yesterday, Hinata," he said to her, and for a moment she looked like she was shocked at his words before she composed herself and quickly replied with a, "It's all right, Naruto-kun." He suddenly stood up from his chair and took hold of her small hand in his. "Let's go," he declared as a wide smile spread across his face as he thought about where he planned to take her. "Where are we going, Naruto-kun?" she asked with a squeak as he pulled her along. He didn't answer her because it would be a surprise and he fully intended to see her reaction to it. He started climbing the hill that he'd climbed 1,000 times before with Hinata's hand tightly and securely in his. Somehow to Naruto, climbable the hill felt like a whole new experience today. A feeling he has never gotten before taking the same route to the top. When he suddenly stopped walking and faced her, she looked a little out of breath with a slight blush on her pale cheeks. She looked at him questioningly, and all he did as an answer was grab her shoulders and turn her towards the view. Naruto watched as her beautiful lavender eyes widened to an impossible extent and she took in the beautiful scene before her. While she did that, she remained totally oblivious to the man beside her as he stared at her. Hinata's mouth was slightly parted and her eyes were wide with shock, and he did not think he has ever seen anything more beautiful than she is at this moment in his life. "It's beautiful, Naruto-kun," she whispered, and he saw, more than heard, the words slip out of her pink lips. "Isn't it? I spent long hours here as a child," he said as he sat down on the ground and patted the ground beside him, motioning for her to sit down beside him. She sat down beside him, though she did not take her eyes away from the sight she is still enjoying. "Alone?" she asked, and he heard the sadness in her voice as she came to the realization. "When people used to call me names and things, I would just come up here and spend hours here," he said as his painful childhood replayed in his head. He wanted Hinata to know everything about him. Things that made him happy, sad, shocked, pained. He wanted her to know everything. As if she had read his mind, Naruto felt Hinata move and push herself flush against his side as she leaned on his body. But when he turned around to look at her, her blush from before had doubled in color and she kept on staring at the scene before her. He smiled at her even though she was not looking at him. The fact that he spent hours on end here as a child crying, and the fact that he was here right now with her as she tried her best to let him know that she will always be here with him from now on and that he does not need to be alone anymore, made his heart give a pleasant squeeze. He felt so stupid to have acted too selfishly possessive over her yesterday when she so clearly loved him to no end. When she had not so much as looked at another man with the same sparkling eyes as the way she looks at him. "Hinata?" he called her softly. Her body moved slightly as she shivered a little. He rarely felt the cold, sometimes because of the Kyuubi, and he wondered if it's really that cold out today. He didn't give it much thought as he quickly shrugged out of his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. You'll be cold," she said, and he gave her another one, his assuring smiles. "I'm fine. Kurama's chakra usually keep me pretty warm," he said as he sheepishly scratched the back of his head. The next moment his hand was back down at his side and his smile faded from his face. "Hinata?" he called her name again. She hummed as a reply. He took a deep breath before speaking again. He wanted this moment to be perfect because he had given her so many perfect moments in the last 2 months. He just doesn't seem to realize that whatever the moment he decides to tell her he loves her would be seen as a perfect moment in her eyes. "I love you," he finally said, and she froze in his arms and he felt all movement stop, even her breathing. She turned her head towards him a moment later, her eyes as wide as saucers. "He's giving her all kinds of surprises today. You've never said that before," she stuttered out, and he felt his face heat up as she stared at him. "Yeah, but I knew it a long time ago. I just didn't know how to say it," he said as his whole face and ears heated up. They stared at each other like that for a long time, but neither wanted to look away. She had been so shocked to hear him say that, and it was evident in her eyes as well. But he could also see the happiness she felt just by hearing him say those few words. He was happy as well because he had taken part in making her feel that overwhelming emotion. Do you love me too? He had to ask. He knew of course that she did, but he had the sudden urge to hear her say it to him. Of course I do, she said, looking at him with bewilderment as if the question was absurd. That's when he realized the question was absurd because she had been showing him how much she loved him from the very beginning. Even before he had known he loved her. He grinned at her before wrapping his arm around her shoulder. Naruto felt great to have said that to her because he had been wanting to for the longest time. He felt really dumb to have been so jealous before because her love for him is evident in the way she looks at him. And if he had known that his unnecessary possessiveness over her would have him end up in the hospital for 2 days, then he definitely would have never kissed her in front on her father. But it had felt nice when he saw Katsu's eyes widen in shock when he pulled her to him. It was worth it, but he would still not do it in front of her father again. Definitely not. Naruto had a really small bed. So small in fact that he had hated it with his very being since he turned 15, that is until now. Right now, he was more than happy that his bed is small. He was praising his state of bankruptcy for never allowing him to have enough money to buy a bigger bed. Because at this very moment, he was lying on his small bed with his girlfriend flush against his side. Neither could move because they both fit on it barely. It was a single bed, so even though they both could lay on it, they had to be very close. Not that Naruto minded. When Hinata had arrived at his front door at 2 o'clock, the weather outside had already been bad. There was a light drizzle and the heavy rain clouds were moving fast towards the village. She had only come to give him some homemade lunch and planned on leaving right after. But right at that moment, the light drizzle had turned into a full-blown storm with thunder and lightning and the whole deal. So he had invited her in to wait out the storm. Couple hours into the storm and sitting at his kotatsu table playing Go Fish had grown boring quite fast. That's how the two ended up on his bed with Hinata on the side closer to the wall lying on her back with her head resting on his arm while Naruto too lay on his back with his left arm under Hinata's head and the other over his stomach and intertwined with her left hand between them. He could see the darkened sky overhead from his window and wished it would never stop raining. Naruto could feel her body heat radiating off of her skin and to his even through her jacket and his. At first it had been awkward for the two of them. He had been the one to suggest that they go onto the bed because sitting on the floor was hurting his butt and she had reluctantly agreed with a massive blush. In the first 10 minutes they had tried to get comfortable on the small bed. When they finally found their position to be comfortable for the both of them, it had been quite easy find it normal to be so close to each other. Though his arm is numb and they could both barely fit on the bed, he had never felt more at peace than he felt right now. To be able to be this close to another person and wish for the sensation to last longer was a concept that Naruto had a hard time grasping. But right now he wasn't thinking about the why_s and how_s because just having a person to be this close was enough for him. For 19 years he lived in his house alone, ate alone, slept alone, and since he started dating Hinata 6 months ago she had been vising him a lot. Whenever he opened his front door to be greeted by her gentle smile, he couldn't stop the beat that his heart skips. Right now though, as they lay side by side, their bodies so close to each other's and their hand intertwined, Naruto couldn't think of a better way to spend his day. He turned his head from the ceiling of his apartment to her and just simply stared at her as she stared out the window as the rain came down on the roof and dripped off the side. He was conscious of the way her thumb kept on brushing over his hand softly, so lovingly. He stared at her like that for a long time. Stares at the way her long black-blue eyelashes would slowly brush against the underside of her eyes every time she blinked, at the way her hair was falling onto her left side as she stared outside with a slightly tilted head. At the way she continued to stare outside as if the very concept of rain fascinated her. It must have really fascinated her too because it took her a long time to realize that he had been staring at her. Naruto's heart started beating loudly in his chest and he quickly removed his hand from under her shirt and sat down on the bed, facing her. He was now aware of the pelting rain outside his window as he stared down at her broken expression. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't meant for it to get that far. He had no idea what came over him. He had never planned on doing this like that. But then again, you can't exactly plan things like that either. But to think that lust and desire had the ability to impair all coherent thought from a person was exciting as well as terrifying. The tears finally escaped her eyes and rolled down the side of her face, and she sat up abruptly and stood up from the bed. "Hinata," he called, reaching for her hand as she ran towards the door but barely missed. "Hinata," he called again, his voice reaching desperation, but she did not stop. She ran out the door, leaving behind her shoes and well as a hurt Naruto. He knew he should have run after her, except he didn't because he had no idea what he was supposed to say to her. He stared at the door of his apartment for a long time before lying down on the bed again, facing the ceiling. He immediately missed her warmth and buried his face on the pillow that still had her coconut shampoo scent on it. Oddly enough, suddenly he found his bed to be way too big. Naruto didn't know how long he stayed like that on his bed with his face buried on his pillow. But when he heard the knock on his door and bolted upright, hoping that it was Hinata, the rain had fully stopped and the sky was a beautiful blue with the sun peeking through from the rooftops overhead. He yanked his door open only to be disappointed because on the other side of his door was not Hinata but an Anbo. Oh, the disappointment he felt, he knew, was not concealed well. "Good morning to you too, Dobi." He heard Sasuke's muffled voice through the mask. "Morning?" he asked, finally understanding that he had slept through the night. "Yeah, the Hokage wants to see you right away," Sasuke said before disappearing as soon as he had appeared. Naruto closed the door behind him and sluggishly got ready to go see Ba-chan. He couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. It had been so exciting. He had never experienced something like that ever in his life. It was similar to the adrenaline rush he gets before a battle, yet it had been so different as well. He felt the adrenaline and the rush, but the fear and the need to finish it as soon as possible were nowhere to be seen. He just wanted to keep touching her, keep feeling her, keep tasting her. The fact that she felt uncomfortable with his explorations had not even occurred to him. He wasn't usually like that. He always makes sure that everyone else is comfortable. Especially Hinata of all people. Then why had he not thought about how she would feel? Why had that not occurred to him as he ran his hand over her body? When he arrived at the Hokage's office, he was called in immediately and he stood in front of Ba-chan waiting to hear what she had to say. He did not miss the strange way Tsunade looked at him or the odd look he received from Shizune outside. But he decided to be ignorant to all of that and instead listened to Tsunade. She seems to hesitate before beginning to speak. "Naruto, everyone has come to a decision to name you the next Hokage," she said carefully, and Naruto's blue eyes widened and he could have sworn his heart stopped beating for like a second before restarting again. "But since you are too young, you will be in training with me for a couple of years until you are ready. You have more than proven yourself to the village and the whole world that you are capable of the task." She finished with a smirk on her lips and Naruto didn't know how to react. He had wanted this for so long and right now it felt like he was dreaming. "Congratulations Naruto Uzumaki," Tsunade said with a warm smile, and Naruto couldn't even say anything to that, so instead he nodded his head and left the tower. As soon as he stepped out of the Hokage tower he wanted to see Hinata. He wanted her to be the first to hear the news. But he had no idea how to face her after what he had done. He truly felt ashamed of himself for giving into his lust, but he had just received the greatest news of his life and he needed her to be the first to hear it. Which is why he silently made his way to his apartment, even though all he wanted to do was climb up to the Hokage monument and scream the news to the entire village. He contemplated what he should say to Hinata for a long time. This kind of thing had never happened to him. So he had no idea how to fix it and he needed to fix it. He had to. So when the skies darkened and night fell around the village of Konoha, he made his way to the Hyuga compound. When he got close to the gates, he decided to avoid it altogether. He didn't like the guard anyway. So he made his way to the back of the compound and sneaked with all the stealth he had in him. If he were to get caught sneaking into Hinata's bedroom in the middle of the night, he would lose his head for sure. He made his way around the compound as quietly as he could, but he stopped dead on his tracks when he found exactly the person he was looking for. Hinata was on the second floor of the compound looking out her open window, deep in thought from what he can see. He looked at her as she looked out her window. Her midnight hair was swaying to the slight breeze of the night and her eyes seemed to sparkle brighter than the stars of the night. Naruto watched as Hinata tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear and he realized how truly beautiful she really is. He concentrated chakra to his feet and jumped to her window sill, successfully scaring her and earning a squeal as she backed away from the window with a kunai in hand. Well, Now at least he knew she was prepared if an intruder came in. "Naruto-kun?" she asked, bewildered as she dropped the kunai on her bed, and all he could do was grin and scratch the back of his head sheepishly. "Hey Hinata," he said, facing her. She wasn't in her usual ninja attire. She was wearing a light purple gown, what he assumed is her nightgown. It ran all the way down to her ankles and it was tied with a ribbon just above her chest. It was weird seeing her in a dress, but he wouldn't deny that she looked stunning in one. "Naruto-kun. What are you doing here?" she asked as she looked at her bedroom door before facing him again. "I wanted to tell you something," he began quietly. She looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "Hinata, I was chosen to be the next Hokage." He finished looking at her. She seemed too shocked to do anything for a while before her eyes widened and her eyes filled with tears. Naruto panicked for a second, unable to figure out why she was crying. But the next thing he knew, she jumped into his arms, wrapping her arms around his back and pulling him against her. "Naruto-kun, congratulations, I'm so happy for you," she said into his shirt, and her quiet voice was muffled by his shirt. He heard her sob and felt her shoulders shake as she cried, and that's when he realized that she was crying for him. "Hinata, are you crying for me?" he asked as his own arms went to circle around her. I'm so happy, Naruto-kun. Your dream is finally coming true," she said through sobs, and his hands tightened around her. "Yeah, it is," Naruto whispered as the full extent of the news he had received this morning hit him. This was his dream. He had worked so hard to get here. He had wanted this for as long as he can remember, and he had someone to celebrate his biggest achievement with too. 5 years ago, if somebody had told him that he would have someone by his side when his dream finally came true, he would have laughed at them. Naruto never would have thought that he would ever have someone in his life to cry for him like Hinata is doing right now. To have someone be so happy for him that they would cry tears of joy for him. Naruto felt an incredible warmth seep through his whole being as he held Hinata in his arms as she cried. Teats, when his resolve to apologize for his insensitivity increased by tenfold. She was too wonderful, she was too great, and she loved him so much, and he loved her so much as well, so he would keep her, he would protect her, and he would love her to no end because he felt that they belonged with each other. They were meant for each other. "Hinata." He said her name softly and held her shoulders and pushed her away from him to look at her face. Her eyes were red from crying and her nose was also red, but she looked up at him in question. "Hinata, I'm sorry about yesterday. I got carried away and I didn't think about how it would make you feel. I'm really sorry," he finished as his eyes bore down into hers, conveying his apology to her. She stared at him for a moment before breaking into a beautiful, gentle smile. "Naruto-kun. That's not it at all," she said as she reached her hand and laid it on his cheek, and the warmth from her hand seeped into his face, and he wanted to take her hand and press it more firmly against his skin just to feel her. "The reason I told you to stop is because..." She paused, looking away from him as a familiar blush creeped into her pale cheeks. "I'm not very shapely like Sakura-chan or beautiful as Ino-chan. I was just embarrassed," she finished in a quiet voice, totally avoiding eye contact with him and her face turning an impossible color of red. Naruto stared at the top of her head for a long time in disbelief. It didn't take him long to burst into laughter. He knew he shouldn't laugh, but he couldn't help it. He tried his best to control his voice as his laughter died down. When he looked down at her, she was pouting and she looked so adorable that he ended up laughing again. When he calmed down to a certain extent, he looked down at her. "That's ridiculous, Hinata. You are the most beautiful girl I've ever seen," he said in between his laughter. It was indeed ridiculous. He spent most of his days thinking about how beautiful his girlfriend is, and his girlfriend doesn't think she's beautiful. Naruto watched as her eyes moved to his face, looking at him with uncertainty. Naruto stopped laughing and looked at her seriously. He cupped her cheeks in his hands and lifted her head a little to look at him. "Hinata, you are breathtakingly beautiful. I don't know what would make you think otherwise," he said in all honesty, and her eyes danced with happiness as he said it. He leaned forward and landed his lips on her forehead and lingered there for a little longer before moving his head back. "Naruto-kun, thank you," she whispered with a smile. "Hinata, I think we should wait. I know yesterday got a little exciting, but I think we should wait," he told her softly, and she nodded her head in approval at his suggestion. It had taken him a long time to come up with that decision, and he knew it was the best one. As much he wanted to give in to his hormones and rip her clothes apart, he wanted to wait. Wait until they were both ready, until they were both older and wiser and married. He knew he would one day marry Hinata, there was no doubt about it. But until then he would wait, because then even if she had doubts, she would not have them after they were married, and he didn't want her to have doubts. A knock on her door disrupted the couple, and they both stared at each other until the second knock came, and that's when they panicked. "Hinata-sama, are you alright in there?" I heard a man's voice. They heard a female voice from the other side of the door. "Oh, yes, I am alright, Aki-san. I didn't hear anything," she said as she bit her lip, hoping her maid would leave soon. "Oh, must have been my imagination then. Good night, Hinata-sama." And they heard her footsteps walking away from the room. They both let out a sigh and looked at each other before smiling in amusement. "I should leave before someone else shows up. All these guards at your house makes eloping not even worth considering," he said jokingly as he made his way to her window. She blushed as she let out a laugh at his comment. "If we decide to elope, I promise I will find a way to make it through all the guards and all the obstacle I have to face to come to you, Naruto-kun," she said gently, and he looked at her in surprise. But really he didn't have to be surprised because he knew she would. "I know," he said to her before leaning forward to peck her lips softly. They said their goodbyes, and Naruto quietly made his way out of the compound and walked towards his apartment with the widest grin imaginable on his lips. He would never elope with her. She will be the Hokage's wife, even if he had to beg her father for her hand in marriage. He would make sure of it. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.